School Committee meeting, July 27th, 2020. Welcome. And most of our agenda today is going to be on our planning for the fall, and we'll get to that in just a minute. So first we'll start off with the consent agenda. We have minutes from two meetings, June 4th and July 7th. Jennifer, I think we're just going to put them together if that's okay. Do I have a motion to accept those minutes? David? Sharon, you can second it? And I guess I have to. Are there any discussions or additions or about the minutes? Okay, we'll do a roll call then. Okay, here we go. The first of many, I suppose.
Suzanne, can I just make one comment?
Sure.
I would abstain from June because I wasn't a member of school committee, but I would vote in favor of July.
Okay, so you want me
if
to
you combine them, I'll abstain. I'm just saying that just so
Okay.
you know. Okay.
Okay, fine. Jennifer?
I'm going to abstain.
Right. Sharon?
Yes.
Susan?
Yes.
David?
Yes.
Andy?
Abstain.
Mariah?
Abstain.
Helen?
Yes.
Did Barbara make it yet? No? Okay. And I vote yes. Okay. Okay. So they pass. Thank you for letting us do it together. Should we do some grants? Do we need to do the grants separately or do we want to do them together? There's a couple. We have the METCO grant and we have is that it?
No, there's the CFCE grant, the Early Childhood Grant from the Department of Early Education and Care.
Yeah. Where is that? Which one is?
It's
Early
the
childhood
one.
grant. It's the fifth one down in the file.
One,
It's
two,
125,000, something like that. I can't remember how much.
Is it on the agenda?
I don't have it on my agenda.
So
You
it's
do. You see, there's a semicolon between coordinated family and community engagement. That's CFCE.
And then METCO. So those are the two grants, right?
is
Okay.
the Edna Mann Social Justice and Equality Award on the agenda as well? It's in the
No.
file.
Yes, it is. Yeah, but these are grants that we're talking about, METCO and the BEEP grant. METCO is a 1.9 million and early childhood is 125,850.
So
Go ahead,
if
Helen.
people are interested, the CFCE grant funds mostly Margaret's position. The parent part of it is the parent-child home program and the coordinating of the community, early childhood community with the public schools, all sorts of things like that. So, and BEEP gets part of it too.
And METCO, does someone know what Jennifer?
Actually, I was going to ask a question. I was just curious. It says it's basically like level funded on the application, on the paperwork. And I was just wondering if it included any of the transportation implications from COVID that we might have, depending on how many students we can fit on a bus. So I just didn't know if any of that is included in that, or if that will be another expense dealt with separately. Does anyone know?
Are you talking about the METCO?
Yeah, the METCO for transportation specifically.
Yeah, Mary Ellen?
We are trying to set up a meeting with Keith Lozama around that because those expenditures would at this point need to come out of the METCO grant, and there's currently a little bit of room there to absorb some of that, but we're trying to figure out what those discussions are, and then once we know what that grant can fund for this year, with regards to transportation specifically, and maybe even only, we will come back to the school committee and let you know with all of our transportation needs based on how we open school, what the cost implications are going to be.
Mary Ellen, is this the total amount we get for METCO?
Yes.
plus the per pupil. Eventually, I mean, we get for all students, we get the state, they're counted in our per pupil count, correct?
I'm gonna have to go back and look to see if METCO students are counted as part of Chapter 70 or not.
That
That's
was
what you
my
mean by per pupil.
understanding. That was my
Yeah. I don't, with the revisions that have been going on and METCO, I just want to double check that.
Okay.
I have the same understanding you do, Helen, but my antennas are going up on whether that's still true.
My recollection, which may be faulty, was it was closer to 5 million that we were getting from the state total.
Oh, because you're all pulling in Chapter 70 allocations?
Yeah, I think so. I may be wrong. But that was my
we'll check on that.
Okay.
It's a good question to have the answer to. I have the same understanding. I just want to double check.
And they are awarding this even though the state budget hasn't been decided.
If we have an award notice, they are.
Interesting.
Yeah. Do I have a motion to accept the grants?
I move it.
Okay, second. Jennifer, thank you. Any other questions or discussion about this? These are the two grants, METCO and BEAP. Helen?
Yes.
Mariah?
Yes.
Andy?
Yes.
David?
Yes.
Susan?
Yes.
Sharon?
Yes.
Jennifer?
Yes.
And I vote yes. Is Barbara here yet? No, maybe she's not coming today. Okay, let's see what we have next. The high school project. I'm assuming we have to do each of these separately. So there are two high school project change orders. Susan, do you want to say anything about that? Or Ray's here. Ray, do you want to say something?
All I can tell you is this is the final procurement of the project. It's called the guaranteed maximum price. We did it in bits and pieces throughout the school over the last few months. The final piece of this was received in February, and it took this long to negotiate it with the building commission. That's all I can say for now, unless there's some questions.
Are there any questions? Helen?
Just to remind us, the original, how much is this, assuming these monies, how much are we still over on the budget?
Well, we'll
point?
go back into the town meeting in November for $32 million.
Okay.
No,
and the
nothing
cost-
has substantially, Helen, nothing has substantially changed on the budget.
Okay, that's what I was trying to figure out, if we're still over that much or if it's gone down a bit.
Helen, I can answer that question. We had $1.5 million in savings negotiating with the building commission. And then we had the second piece of this, PCCO number 7, was a schedule update extension, which dealt with some schedule unforeseen conditions. So the total negotiated settlement is around $500,000 to $600,000 under what we originally received back in February.
Okay.
Mariah?
This is a follow-up on Helen's question, just a clarification. The 32 million still includes the work for the Tappan Street Gym and the playground as well, correct?
Of course. What was asked at the advisory committee, just to give a little background, is they wanted more certainty. And when we were presenting to the advisory in the spring, we couldn't provide certainty. So we have a plan to bid all the projects. We're working with the T. In fact, we're going to have a conference call with the T this afternoon. And so we're hopeful that we'll have more certainty in our number when we bring it back in November.
Do I have a motion to accept these two change orders? Susan, thank you. Do I have a second? Thank you, David. We'll take a vote. Jennifer?
Yes.
Sharon,
Yes.
Susan,
Yes.
David,
Yes.
Andy,
Yes.
Mariah,
Yes.
Helen,
Yes.
and I vote yes as well. Thank you. Let's do the Driscolls next if we can. So those are contract amendments number 3 and 4. One for 27,500 and one for 42,900. Susan, you have anything that you want to tell us about that? No? Any questions from anybody?
I'll move it.
Thank you, Helen. For my second? I'll
Susan?
second. I'll second. Are there any questions or comments? Here we go, voting. Helen,
Yes.
Mariah,
Yes.
Andy,
Yes.
David,
Yes.
Susan,
Yes.
Sharon. Yes, Sharon, I'm sorry. Yep, and Jennifer.
Yes.
And I vote yes as well. Thank you. Okay, now we have 2 grants, or not grants, I'm sorry, scholarships. We have the David F. Moore and the Edna M. H. Mann. One for 1,500 and one for 1,000. Any questions about that? I actually had one too. Helen?
Yeah, just a statement. I knew David Moore. He was a wonderful teacher at the high school for years, a very special math teacher. He was married to a Runkle first grade teacher, Romy White, and both his children attended the high school. So it's really sad, and I'm very happy that there's a scholarship in his name.
I would also like to echo what Helen just said, and Mr. Moore was actually one of my teachers. I had a scheduling issue my senior year, so I ended up with an SWS math class that year, but he was my teacher. It was very memorable. He was great. I'm sure that he's going to be missed, and my condolences to his family. I'm glad that we get to immortalize him in some small way by hopefully approving this vote.
Thank you. I just had a question. It wasn't clear to me on the Edna Mann what the criteria were for awarding the scholarship. It wasn't filled in on the form, so I don't know who knows that, but I was just curious. Okay, we'll move on. We'll take a vote. Do I have a motion to accept the scholarships?
So moved.
Okay, second. Jennifer, thank you. Here we go. Jennifer,
Yes.
Sharon,
Yes.
Susan,
Yes.
David,
Yes.
Andy,
Yes.
Mariah,
Yes.
Helen,
Yes.
and I vote yes. It's unanimous. Thank you.
Just
Jennifer,
Oh, sorry. Can we just verify that someone is going to follow up on what the criteria are?
yeah, who could do that? Mary Ellen, can you do that? Are you in charge of scholarships? Who's in charge of scholarships?
Well, that's what I wanted to ask Anthony. It used to be Scott Butchard at the high school who did the scholarships, and I don't know who's been appointed to, he retired. I don't know if he's still doing it.
Helen, you know that nobody leaves Brookline, right? So Scott continues to work on scholarships along with the current guidance counselor, Kathy Whalen. So if Mary Ellen's okay with it, I'm happy to follow up on this scholarship. But Mary Ellen, I yield to you depending on what you think would be best.
I'm happy that Anthony would follow up on the scholarship with the scholarship committee.
Great, I will do that. So I will learn the criteria. And to whom should I send that? Just Suzanne, would that be to you as chair of the school committee?
Sure, that'd be fine. I
Great.
can share that out. We'll send it to Robin. You can send it to Robin, actually, and she'll send it to us.
Awesome, will do. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Anthony. Okay, Jim, welcome. Good to see you. You are up with your report.
Yes, thank you, thank you. Just briefly, I just wanted to give just a little update on just a few things, sort of like what I've been doing a little bit. And we had a 3-day leadership retreat last week with senior staff and the principals. It was terrific 3 days. We spent time talking about what is leadership about, how are we going to operate as a team, and how are we going to be a high-functioning team, and very engaging. We had Tony Bent facilitate some of that, and really breaking down any things that we have to get to know each other as quickly as possible. And we did that. It was terrific. We spent time talking about the opening, which we'll talk about in a few minutes, and the impact that has on the schools. Principals able to do that. They also identified going into this year, what are the major goals we should work on together, and at some point I'll be bringing that to the school committee to help us finalize. So that would be great. I also attended the Superintendent's Summer Institute. Heard some terrific speakers from across the country, particularly Douglas Brinkley, who's a historian who spoke quite passionately about what's happening in the world and compared it to, like, if you were a Depression kid or you were involved with the 60s and civil rights and what that meant for your life, and how this time is going to impact students forever. And he spoke about that in a way that was captivating for the superintendents and engaged us. That was great. I continue to meet with community partners, and I met with the Education Foundation. I mean, talk about altruistic view of life. That was really refreshing. And also, I'm scheduled to meet with the Innovation Fund that's coming up pretty soon. I had my first meeting with Mel Kleckner. Many of you know that I know Mel from a previous time when I was superintendent in Winchester. So we got reacquainted. He is terrific, and we committed to meeting on a regular basis so that we can sort of get through this very, very challenging time together. Of course, Mel's about 9 feet 2, and I'm about 2 feet 9. So together we make up quite a team when we're walking around. I've been joining the task force when I can and listening to what's happening. I'll speak more about that when we go to the next section. But I continue to meet with the JLMC, with the union on a regular basis, and am focused and am enjoying my time here, meeting as many people as I can, as quickly as I can. The issues are pretty big, as you well know, but it seems to me this is a community that's ready to take them on, and in a forthright, candid way. So here we go. It's Monday, and that's a school committee, and we're going to present in a few minutes an update on what the work that's been going on and where we stand with the opening. Thanks, Suzanne.
So Jim, you're up next. I think it's your turn.
Okay, it's a nice segue really into having, and one of the best decisions I have ever made in my life, I have to say, is when I asked Casey and Aaron. You know Casey Nomiller and Aaron Cooley. I've asked them to take the leadership on the opening, and they have been fabulous. Meeting with people, organizing, writing, collecting information, keeping people in the loop, and moving the ball forward at every turn. They are going to be presenting this morning, and I obviously will be here filling in and peppering along the way. But there are a number of things I have to say. Today is not for the school committee to vote, but the school committee is going to have to vote. It's required to vote on a model that we are going to implement. So I'm asking the school committee, please ask questions that you need answers to. We may not have the answers for you on the spot. I can tell you we won't have them on the spot. But questions that we can answer, questions that are in our control. We need to know those answers, those questions, so we can provide you with the information. In the course of the next 2 weeks, you will need to vote. And I'm certain you're going to want to have the best information that you can in order to make a vote that's informed. This is also one of those circumstances that everyone knows, very stressful, exceedingly stressful. And, you know, we did the surveys and the surveys split. So everyone is not going to be completely satisfied. But people should know that this has been a process with integrity, that we've really worked very hard to turn over every stone and to understand all of what the implications are, try to be real and practical as well as creative, and to try to reach a place where we're driven by the values that we've articulated. Number one, the science and health and safety must be at the forefront of all decisions that are being made. Then the other priorities will follow. Instruction, time, all of that will follow. But first and foremost, we're looking at the health and safety, as I'm sure you are as well. I have to say that, and I've said it before, but I really want to make a point of saying it again, the expert panels have been spectacular. They have been such a value added that words really don't describe the full thing. To be able to go to people who not only understand their own field, but they understand the broader view, and they can have conversations and they can join you as thought partners, has been such a gift to the process of looking at how are we going to open that. I actually think, I don't know what other communities are doing, but I feel as though Brookline really has a value added with such a resource. So that has been outstanding. And meeting, of course, with Matt Gillis, Tricia Lamb, they have been working just round the clock. You're going to hear from Matt, I hope, a little bit later during the presentation. The senior leadership staff working with the union and trying to drill down a little bit. We know that at some point we're going to have to move on a memorandum of understanding, an MOU, a new one. And I think the union is prepared. You know, you got a note on that, as did I, to begin engaging in that process. But I really do think that we all have the same goal in mind, to bring students back as much as we can, to have in-person learning to the extent that we can, when we can, because that we know is what's best for students. It's also what's best for teachers, what's best for the community. But we have a ways to go, and there are some hurdles to get over, and there are some decisions that still have to be made. We are not there. We are not asking you to vote today. We are not going to be offering a recommendation today for a model. We have a number of options that will be presented, and asking you to really ask questions, and so that we can get you the information, which we obviously commit to doing. And you know, I'm not feeling good about the virus. Obviously, I'm not feeling good about kids worried about being in school and families worried. I'm not feeling very good about that. But boy, am I feeling good about the people that I have the pleasure of working with in this community. It has truly been, and I've only been here a month, but it has truly been a terrific experience. And I feel as though I know a lot of people very well. And more important, I think, is the true belief that working together we can get to a good place. And as much as there are different opinions and different points of view and different perspectives, people have been very, very, very respectful, are listening to each other, and understand the seriousness of what we're dealing with and the implications of the decisions that we're going to be recommending, and the school committee has to vote. So with that as sort of a preview, sharpen up your pencils, because we're going to want these questions. And by the way, I'm going to be next week, and I've asked Betsy to begin to set it up, doing town hall meetings with the staff, so that I can have question and answer periods and communicate with them to the extent possible to continue to gather information. So with that, I'm going to flip this over to Casey. Casey, are you ready?
I am ready.
Casey,
Okay.
can I jump in for just a second while you're setting that up? It looks like you're ready. just to let people know. So the idea, what I'm thinking is that they'll go through the presentation, and then when they're done, there'll be time for questions and comments, looking for comments as well. And what I will do, if it's okay, is I'll give everyone a chance to go through once. Everybody will have one chance to speak. Then we'll go through again, and everybody will have a second chance to speak. And then, depending on how much time we have, we will just open it up to conversation. That way, everybody will have a chance to, if you don't wish to speak, when it's your turn, you just can pass. That's fine. So I'll let you go ahead, Casey. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Suzanne. I appreciate that. Good afternoon, everybody. We are excited to present to you all the work that we have been engaged in really since May, but for the last 2 weeks, I would say pretty deeply. So here's the agenda today, and I just want to give everybody a heads up that there's been a lot of work that's been completed thus far. The presentation includes really what we think are the most informative to share with the committee. Ultimately, the committee votes on the reopening plan. There are a lot of details that we may not have touched upon today, but keep in mind, this is not the only information that we have. I want to acknowledge that there have been a lot of partners to this work. Again, today is really to give an overview of the different learning models that we have and the options from which to choose for this committee. Some quick background here. What we present is really just a snapshot of where we are. We know that there are factors that can change pretty quickly, and we remain flexible and nimble. We have about 40 slides, and as Suzanne said, bear with us. It is a lot of information, and we'll appreciate you holding questions until the end. DESE to date is requiring that all districts prepare 3 different reopening models: an in-person, a hybrid, and a remote. And then regardless of the pandemic's status, we do have to plan for remote learning. This graphic here just outlines the continuum of the models that are being considered. I'll walk you quickly through this. Starting on the left is really the goal. We want to be able to return without any restrictions, but we know that it's far from where we are now, so we're going to look at the other 3 options. First being an in-person learning model with new safety requirements, and I'll have updates on each of these, in particular how they pertain to the district. This is just an overview of the 3 models. In the middle, you have a hybrid, so it's a mix of learning in person and then remotely, and you'll see that broken out more specifically into the different schedules that I will share with the committee. And then remote learning is when, of course, all learning takes place remotely. I should say that there's a caveat you'll see underneath each of these, that there are particular groups with remote learning needs, and they're listed under here regardless of what model we are in when we reopen. So we did get updated guidance from the Department of Early and Secondary Education on Friday, which allowed us to weave that into this presentation. There are more specifics, so that was good for us to see. I know that last time when we presented, there were still a lot of unknowns in terms of what direction DESE wants districts to go in. So some of this information is helpful. As of now, the school year minimum is still 180 days, which equals to about 900 hours for elementary and 990 hours of structured learning time for secondary levels. We do, and I have to underscore this, we do anticipate that these will be modified by the state. And by modifications, I mean fewer days in the school year, which would then, of course, also lower the minimum number of hours during the school day, or throughout the school year, I should say. So there are student groups that the state is asking that districts prioritize. I want to call out or bring your attention here to the first 2 groups, because in cases where the student populations listed here are too large of a group to safely return all of the prioritized students in person, districts are being asked to prioritize students in the first 2 groups for in-person instruction. So these are students with disabilities and English learners, particularly those with most intensive needs, and students whose families report that they do not have access to reliable internet or a suitable learning space at home. Of course, we are trying to take into consideration all 5 of these groups to the extent that we can, while still maintaining the health and safety of all of our students. I do want to add here also that even if a student is prioritized for in-person learning here, families, parents, and caregivers do have the option to choose Brookline's remote learning program for their child if they prefer. Here are the key dates that are really driving our work. There's a preliminary reopening plan that we have to submit to the DESE. School committee is required to vote, as Dr. Marini mentioned, in order for us to submit our final plans to DESE on August 10th. The next school committee meeting is on August 6th. At this point, we will have a recommendation, a superintendent's recommendation for the committee to vote on. This certainly puts pressure on us to present something that you can vote on by the 6th. And then the pressure is on you too, the committee, to really ask those insightful questions to drive our work too. September 1st is the all staff report date for the coming school year. And then September 3rd, you'll note that there's an asterisk in terms of when the first day of school is for students. The reason why this is subject to change is because if we are, because there are many factors, I guess I should say, the reopening models or model that we choose will impact when students begin school, and you'll see why in a few slides. What I will do now is switch screen sharing so that Erin can present on some health and safety updates.
Great, thanks, Casey. Does everyone see my screen?
Yep.
Okay, great. So I'm going to go through some of the health and safety updates, for you today. Again, we'll have a little bit more detail than we have for you in the previous presentation that we gave to you. Oh, sorry about that. Here we go. All right, so in order of PPE supplies, and Matt, I see Matt Gillis on the line as well, so he can answer any questions you might have about what specifically we have ordered. But you can see there the lists of masks, hand sanitizer, alcohol wipes, spray bottles, etc. We have enough product based on our enrollment numbers from last year to last us through November 2020, and we're working right now, or Matt's team is working on additional orders and what we might need, past November as we move in through the school year if we are in the buildings. In addition, we have been doing some work around air quality and ventilation. We currently have, a group of volunteers looking at, numbers of classrooms numbers of windows in each classroom. Do the windows open in their classroom? We also need to do a little bit more work with some engineers around, the exchange rate of ventilation and air in the classrooms in our buildings. So that's one thing that we have as some ongoing work in the next couple of weeks. As Casey mentioned, we did receive some updated guidance from DESE on Friday around transportation requirements. This is essentially 1/3 of students on a bus with a bus monitor. And so really that impacts our METCO population of students. And we can talk a little bit more potentially if you have questions about what that means in terms of number of trips that our buses might need to be making and what type of budget that would require for us. We're working on that now. And then we also had a group of you folks and Dr. Marini and some members from our expert panel, as well as a representative from the Department of Public Health here in Brookline do a walkthrough of some Baker classrooms, middle school and elementary school, set up in different ways in the 3 feet and the 6 feet of distance between desks. They looked at rooms that had tables, 4-person tables instead of desks. And it really was a mix, depending on the classroom, as to how comfortable folks felt with the distance and spacing and furniture in the classroom. So for example, they looked at a middle school English classroom where the space was a little bit too tight with the 3 feet of distance. When they sat down, they really felt like it wasn't enough room for the teacher, as well as the students in the classroom if they had to navigate around the class. That 3 feet of distance would really condense a little bit further if you had students and teachers moving. On the flip side, there was a 2nd grade classroom that was really large. I think Matt could probably correct me, but somewhere around 1,000 square feet, and 24 single desks could fit in that room. There was plenty of space for teachers and students to walk around, and the comfort level was, a lot higher in that room. And then finally, the group looked at a room with 4-person tables where Matt and his team had set up plexiglass to split the students. And again, it felt a little bit too cramped. These were adults obviously sitting at the tables, but they felt that students could kind of reach around and still touch each other, and that, the plexiglass wasn't really something that would work in that particular classroom for those students. And as I go to my next slide, you can see we've done some mathematical calculations, or Matt and his team have done some calculations, again, strictly based on math, whether our full enrollment, student enrollment from last year could fit in all classrooms in those buildings using 3 feet with a mask or 6 feet with a mask. And you can really see that if we look at all of our K-8 buildings, we could potentially fit all of our students in using that 3 feet of distance, 3 feet being edge to edge of the chair. But when we move it to 6 feet, there were really some concerns about students. Concern really being that some classrooms in our building might be able to, and others might not. For example, in Baker, in the previous slide, I told you that, that 2nd grade classroom felt very comfortable, and those other 2 classrooms that they visited did not. And then the final column on this chart here just talks about whether we have adequate furniture in all of our classrooms to meet the health and safety needs of our students and our staff. And you can see all of those are listed as no right now. One, because we haven't yet ordered enough of materials that we might need to split up desks using those plexiglass. And 2, when we did the Baker walkthrough with the plexiglass, again, there were some concerns about whether or not that was the right way to set up the furniture in our classroom, specifically in younger classrooms. In addition to that transportation guidance that we received on Friday, we also got some guidance from DESE around courses that might need additional health and safety concerns. So those are courses like chorus, anything to do with singing, brass or woodwind instrument use, physical education, dance, theater, are all courses that the state feels are going to require additional health and safety measures because they might involve increased respiration for students. And so you can see in the table that I have listed for you what DESE has essentially recommended and told us for now at this point. Obviously, things are obviously changing day by day, but at this point, what courses can be held indoors and what courses can be held outdoors with a little bit of guidance. So just to highlight for you, any performing arts is not permitted indoors. So when I say performing arts, I mean, that singing, anything that you're, blowing into instruments or singing. You can do these courses outdoors with 6 to 10 feet of distance. Again, 10 feet for chorus if you have to take off, the masks. Masks are obviously encouraged if possible in other performing arts courses. And then below there, you see the Same notes for physical education. So these courses can be held indoors, but not permitted without a mask. So students will have to wear a mask during any phys ed courses with 6 feet of distance if they are indoors. If they are outdoors, 6 to 10 feet of distance is going to be required. You can have your mask off. If you are 10 plus feet away, masks need to be on if you are 6 feet away. And then there are obviously other courses where students are sharing materials. And there's some additional guidance there, like visual arts courses, for example. Hand washing is always part of the recommendation. If students can have their own materials, that would be preferable. 6 feet apart, obviously, if possible as well in those classes. And we've linked the guidance there for some further detail. All right, and then just some additional core health and safety practices. So if we decide to return to the building in any capacity, so whether that's full in person or a version of hybrid, we will have to put these things in place. So self-assessing and staying at home if you're not feeling well, practicing good hand hygiene, wearing masks or face coverings. We've talked about this before. 3 to 6 feet of physical distancing maintained in the classroom and around the buildings. Cohorts and assigned seats. So when I say cohorts, I mean students moving throughout the building together, not a lot of mixing of students, more teacher movement than student movement, and then maximizing ventilation as much as possible. And then finally, before I hand it back to Casey, we just want to make sure we're pointing out our values in the public schools of Brookline. And we're always asking ourselves these 3 questions before or during our planning. Does our plan reaffirm our commitment to educational equity and anti-racism? Does our plan support the physical and mental health of our students, families, and staff? And does our plan address the needs of all students? So again, as we continue to finalize our plans, we want to make sure that these 3 things are always at the top of our mind.
Great.
I'm going to switch it back over.
Erin. All right. Erin, just give me a thumbs up to make sure people can hear me. You can hear me? Great. All right. For folks who are listening, viewing at home, I just want to point you to the link where you can get this presentation. I know that there's a lot of information and we're not covering every little bullet. If you go to brookline.k12.ma.us and that's /reopen, you'll find a lot of information related to reopening, including this presentation that we have today. So I am going to provide an overview of the learning models right now that we have considered. I want to just stress again what Dr. Marini said, which is that our top priorities are the health and safety of not just our students, but all of our faculty and staff, and then the families who are connected to our staff and students, of course. But very much up there is making certain that our kids are growing as much, that they're learning in their growth as much as they can during this next school year, and that we're also committed to choosing a model that allows us to deliver the same high quality instruction as we have before. It will look different, and that is what DESE continues to say, and we have embodied that. We know that it will look different, but again, we want to make sure that our kids can continue to grow in their learning and that we're still able to continue providing high quality instruction. What I'm going to do next is walk you through the different options that were along that continuum of learning models that start with in-person. In our analysis, this is probably no surprise to the committee, but all of our models will have some financial implications as it will have we'll need additional staffing and in some cases spaces also outside of our school buildings. And what I want to stress again is that there are just overviews, so they're just sample schedules. So this first slide is the main message I want to get across here is that independent of whatever learning model we open in for K-12, we are committed for BEAP to be all in person. So this is 5 days a week. However, we will close if the district closes schools. DESE now has a new requirement that if a superintendent is going to consider closing a school or a district, we do need to inform DESE. I can't remember, Jim, if whether or not we need their permission or it's really just to inform the commissioner. So feel free to jump in if you have more on that.
Only that we need to consult with DESE before any decision like that is made.
Got it. Okay. Thank you. There's a note here about, or a sentence here about maintaining, in order to maintain health and safety standards, we would have 10 students per classroom with one teacher and one paraprofessional. For those students who are in our sub-separate classes, that would be 6 students max, a teacher, and then depending on the needs of that classroom, 3 to 4 paraprofessionals. The schedule for BEEP is here. What I want to note here for the committee is you have your typical 8 to 12:15 for a full day sub-separate program. We end at 2:20. For extended day, what we have had in the past is an early and a late shift. The early shift ends at 3 p.m. and the later schedule, right, at least as of last year, ends at 5:45. There is potential modification here depending on the cleaning schedule, and also we need to get a little bit more information on what prolonged exposure could mean for our youngest learners and our teachers of these students, because essentially we do have students in this group who would go to school from 8 to 5:45. These are the requirements in order for us to have an in-person learning model. So students would be coming in 5 days a week. So really no different. This is the all-in model, essentially, is fitting all of the students in. They still need to be placed in cohorts. As Erin mentioned, we do have to maintain the 3 to 6 feet of social distancing. There are time allocations that will have to occur with school schedules in order to adhere to the health requirements with regard to mask breaks and hand washing. You'll notice that we will have pros and cons for each of the learning models that we present today. Here they are for the all-in-person learning model. I do want to note here that at this point, this is not a serious consideration. We do not feel that right now we can put a lot of energy into this model. Our pressure testing is showing that we can't safely do this. If you think back to the grid that Erin showed earlier with the concerns of moving from 3 to 6 feet. And then there are still some unknowns about air ventilation in each of the classrooms in our buildings. I will move next into our hybrid model where students are on site 50% of the time, and then they're remote learning the other 50%. So in this learning model, we're dividing students again into 2 cohorts, regardless of the 2-day schedule or the week on, week off schedule, which I'll show you some samples of in subsequent slides. The key pieces of these hybrid models for the audience to know is that there is an earlier end to the day to provide for cleaning, and for teachers to still have that time to collaborate and plan. In these models, specials will be provided remotely. So those are the pieces that they have in common that I want to make sure the committee has. So here you have here an overview of the 2 different hybrid models that we are considering. So if you're looking at the 2-day model, you'll see we have cohort A and B. When one group is in person, the other group is learning remotely, and then that switches off on Thursday and Friday. On Wednesdays, everybody would be learning remotely again to allow for deeper cleaning of the buildings. If you look at the week on and week off model, the cohorts stay in the same learning model or same learning mode for the entire week before you switch the following week. We are also aware that most holidays do fall on a Monday, and as we do our planning, we'll have to take that into consideration. What we have here is a sample daily schedule for an in-person model for kindergarten And second grade, you'll remember that BEEP will follow the schedule that I showed earlier. And this is just, again, a sample for kindergarten, first, and second grade. Again, I just want to reiterate, this is just to show that we can make it work in terms of scheduling while following the health and safety guidelines as laid out by DESE. Here's an example of a schedule for the 2-day hybrid model for 3rd through 5th graders. Again, this is not for any specific school, but really just to show you that we can fit in core content and specials in a hybrid model. Here's a sample week on, week off model for a hybrid learning mode for our middle schoolers, again, to illustrate that we can fit in core content and specials. Now, I know that this looks a little bit crazy because it's all blank. This is a sample schedule, 2-day hybrid model for the high school. And the reason why it is blank, given that there are many complexities to high school scheduling, given the many different course offerings that we have. I do have my 2 leaders from the high school, Anthony and Hal, here, who can answer questions at the end related to high school scheduling. But really, this is just to show the cohorts that would come in to the building 2.5 days, and then the other 2 days, I should say the 2.5 days towards the end of the week. This is, again, not set in stone. This is just to give the committee an idea that we can make it work in a hybrid learning model. Pros and cons for a hybrid model are listed here. There are many others, I'm sure, that just didn't make it onto the screen, but these are the ones that we felt that were the most salient to present to the committee. One of the cons here at the end you'll see is it is a pretty complex and difficult model to implement logistically, given the space and ventilation concerns. We do also have to consider teaching outside to some extent. Here are some additional pros and cons broken out by the hybrid model. With the 2-day hybrid model, the schedule is a little bit more routine and consistent, so that it allows for students and families to manage scheduling a bit better. There is a swing day for teachers that would allow for more planning to take place. It does, however, mean that all of the cleaning happens on, or the deeper clean, I should say, would have to happen on a Wednesday. I think in either hybrid model, asking teachers to instruct in both a remote fashion and an in-person fashion pedagogically is difficult. So that is something to consider. For the week on, week off model, it does allow for relationships to be built, I think, quicker, because people can be together than 5 consecutive days versus 2 days, and then waiting until the next week to be in person again with your cohort and your adult, with your teachers and other educators who would be in your classroom. We also recognize that, you know, in any hybrid model, scheduling for parents and teachers is quite difficult, especially if they have school-age children themselves at home. We did spend, as Dr. Marini said, a good deal of time last week with all of our principals, and then a few other school leaders joined us too. And here's a list of their main concerns. Of course, there were others, but we tried to group them and share with the committee in terms of what they're thinking and what their concerns are related to a hybrid model. We will be short spaces in some of our buildings because we need smaller class sizes. So therefore, we will need to move into other classrooms in the school. The next bullet here is a major concern of all of the educators we've spoken to, which is that once you cohort students, we are limiting our inclusion opportunities for all students. This next piece here is just all the logistics, all the planning that needs to go into place, and all of the oversight that a school leader would have to take on to ensure the health and safety of all students does take away from some of that instructional leadership that we expect our school leaders to take on. Another concern of the school leaders is that some teachers would be remote while some are in person. And for those teachers who do have to be remote, it would be for a variety of reasons. This next piece here is just recognizing that shorter and fewer days means that we'll have a difficulty providing a full breadth of programming and education for students. Next, I'll review what a remote learning model could look like. So we want to take lessons learned from our experience from March through June to provide a more regular and consistent opportunity. DESE is requiring districts to provide opportunities for students to access live and synchronous learning. We want to make sure that students and staff are using a primary platform to make it easier for all involved, and then maintain as many of the in-person learning as possible. We hear that in all of the surveys that we have taken from March until now, and then anecdotally, and then parent outreach. We've heard a lot from the community that in-person learning really can't be replicated, but we want to try and be creative while also trying to maintain those aspects as we go. In terms of remote learning, DESE has issued some more specific guidance, which we find helpful, again, because we do have some direction. They do ask that student attendance be taken daily. Teachers are expected to provide consistent feedback to families in the form of formal and informal feedback. There will be and should be common learning expectations for all grade levels and content areas. And then I mentioned this in an earlier slide in terms of students, districts really having to ensure that we provide students with regular and consistent opportunities to access live synchronous instruction. So this is student-to-student interaction. There can be collaborative assignment and projects. Teachers do have to incorporate feedback and any other necessary supports in order for students to get this access. Additionally, from the July 24th update from the state, we do have to write a comprehensive plan for how we will deliver services for our students who are in special education and to our English learners. So we do have to provide a comprehensive plan of support for all three models that I've gone over earlier in the presentation. And we do have a team of folks currently working on that so that we can meet those dates. We have to ensure that our students and teachers have access and are connected in order to teach in a hybrid and a remote learning model. Again, we heard a lot from the community that uniformity in terms of platforms, the way that we learn digitally and how we collaborate is important. And equally as important is that folks, including families, staff, and students, get training on whatever platform it is that we determine. There are pros and cons, of course, to the remote learning model. A big pro is that it is the safest model for students and families. It does provide, to some extent, a consistent experience for students and staff, given that we've been remote. However, we do know that a remote learning environment does impact the amount of support that we can provide to students and their experience. Their overall schooling and classroom experience. We do recognize too that there are social and emotional impacts on both the adults and the students being remote. It's difficult for families, especially for those who have other things going on in their households. And then pedagogically, we understand the challenges that are related to providing feedback, being able to differentiate, as I mentioned earlier. We can't fully replicate the in-person model, but we will, of course, do our best. I will pass this off now to Erin, who will speak a bit more about the survey results.
Great. Thanks, Casey. Thumbs up if you can hear me. Great. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the feedback that we received from both staff and families. So we sent a survey out around July 15th requesting feedback on reopening. We did receive over 7,000 responses between staff and families. And for those of you who have seen me present survey results before, you see those response rate numbers are very high and much higher than some of the response rates we've had in our previous surveys. Obviously, this is top of mind and very important for our entire community. 77% of response rate for families and 74% response rate for staff. I do just want to note here that for families, we did translate the survey into 4 of our top languages. We also had members of our Steps to Success teams reach out to individual families to make sure that they receive the survey and encourage them to take the survey. Similarly, Mindy and her team in the English Learner Department did the same thing with their families, as well as Keith Lozama in the METCO department. So our representation across the district and across our families is pretty good in terms of our family responses. So let's dig into them a little bit more. So I focus mainly on the questions related to remote and hybrid. As Casey mentioned, that in-person learning model just isn't necessarily feasible for us given all of the health and safety requirements and items that we've mentioned earlier. So I wanted to highlight for you the 2 different models that are more realistic given our circumstances. So you can see from families, 16% of families responded saying they prefer the remote learning model. So we gave families, if you had to choose right now, remote, hybrid, or in person, what would your preference be? 39% of those families preferred the hybrid learning model. And then 39% of families felt extremely comfortable or quite comfortable with returning to the school building. And then to differentiate between the hybrid models that Casey presented, we asked families, would they prefer the 2-day hybrid model that we talked about earlier or the week on, week off? And you can see that 40% of our families selected that 2-day hybrid model. In terms of the concerns or top concerns from our family community, not enough live sessions with teachers and peers in either a remote or hybrid model. I think, obviously in the hybrid when they're not live with teachers. Lack of student socialization, same in both models. And then the ability to provide appropriate learning opportunities and lack of student engagement was also a top concern for families. Now, when we look at the feedback from staff, there's a little bit of a difference here. So 41% of staff are preferring the remote learning model, and 40% of staff prefer the hybrid learning model. And only 15% of staff say they feel extremely comfortable or quite comfortable with returning to the school building. When we asked staff the question about the 2 different types of hybrid between 2-day and week on, week off, the response rate was the same for each, around 34%. And then staff's top concerns, managing both in-person and online learning at the same time. That was a high concern when they discussed hybrid. Sanitizing the building between cohorts, again, a high concern when we talked about hybrid. And then the capacity to create a genuine classroom experience was something that really rose high when we asked them questions about remote learning. All right, so now I'm going to move towards the end of our presentation. I know you're probably eager to ask a bunch of questions. In all of the work that we've done, with all of the collaborators that Casey mentioned at the beginning of the presentation and all of the, communication that Dr. Marini has had with superintendents and leaders in other districts, we wanted to provide 2 different reopening options. Again, these are options, they're draft, they are subject to change. But the first one prioritizes full in-person learning for our highest needs and youngest learners. So you can see there that in-person learning would happen for students in pre-K or BEEP, kindergarten through 2nd grade, and for our high needs students. The hybrid model would occur for students in 3 through 8 and 9 through 12. And again, we would have to make a decision about what specific hybrid model would work best in our schools. And then full remote for any student or family who needs to opt out of any type of in-person learning for health and safety reasons. So that's option one. It's a version of hybrid. The second option, which we've been seeing a little bit more recently from some other districts, is what we're calling a phased reopening. So this phased reopening will begin with most, not all, but most students in a remote learning setting. So in person would still be our BEAT population and our high needs students. There wouldn't be any students in a hybrid model, and then students that are fully remote would be K-2, 3 to 8, and 9 to 12. Again, subject to change option. Well, you'll see in this next slide what I mean by phased. So if you're looking at the top blue flag there, you see that curriculum development is ongoing. When you move to the bottom red flag, we talk more about planning, August 24th to September 2nd. Back to the top light blue, September 3rd to October 30th would be the remote learning for those students in K through 12. Moving back down to the bottom, we would switch to a hybrid model from November 2nd through the Christmas break, and then hopefully be able to go to school in person for all students from January to June. Just noting this is go ahead, Casey.
Oh, I think you were going there, Erin, but I was just going to note that these dates are obviously subject to change. Yep. We would work in conjunction with Dr. Swanichet and the Public Health Department to identify some metrics that I think we'd have to hit to make sure that we're comfortable moving along that continuum towards in-person. So it wouldn't mean, if we do go to a phased reopening, there would obviously still be a lot of work that would need to get done to solidify these dates. You know what, they wouldn't be set in stone to say if we open remotely in September, that kids wouldn't come back until January. If all the metrics are pointing towards us being able to open safely before January, that would be a priority.
Right. All right, so let's get into some next steps. Our PSB team is currently, I think maybe today or tomorrow, starting their window inventory of our buildings and our ventilation review of our buildings. We will be sending out a second survey to staff and families. So unlike the previous survey where I asked participants or respondents to indicate their preference of learning model, we will actually need families and staff to indicate essentially whether or not they would come back to the school building if we were in a hybrid model or if they needed to be remote. For scheduling, if we are in person in any capacity, so hybrid model, we need to do some work on cohorting, figure out times for recess, mass breaks, hand washing, what arrival and dismissal would look like given some social distancing, and then of course transportation specifically for our METCO population, and then obviously a lot of work around curriculum training and PD planning for our staff. And then next steps for our larger PSB team, we talked a lot in our expert panel 4 and in this group around COVID-19 testing and what that could look like for the town and for the schools. Finalizing our budget, how much more dollars we might receive for the CARES Act. So there's a school CARES Act and then a town CARES Act. We're receiving dollars in both of those areas. So just finalizing what those exact numbers are and what we can use to purchase with those dollars. I talked about on the previous slide, finalizing enrollment and staffing, you know, how many of our staff need to be remote? What does that look like for scheduling? How many students are coming to our buildings? What does that look like for scheduling? We have our negotiations with the union. We would need to select and plan for a remote learning option. So even if we decide to go with a hybrid version, the state is requiring us to have a remote learning plan in the instance where we might need to switch to that. throughout the year. And then as we talked about in the beginning, some dates, our preliminary plan is due on Friday to DESE. And then we are hoping to have the school committee vote on learning model on August 6th because our finalized plan is due to DESE on the 10th of August. And that brings us to the end of our presentation. I'm gonna stop sharing my screen, but we can always go back to specific slides if people have questions. Thank you.
Oh, thank you so much, Casey and Aaron. I'm sure we have lots of questions and I would guess comments as well. So as I said before, I'm going to let everybody have a chance to speak once before we go to somebody speaking a second time. Let everybody speak a second time, and then we'll just open up the floor to additional questions, knowing that there'll be some limit to our time on this. We could be here all day and all night, but at some point we need to call it an end, so we will do that as well. So who would like to go first? Sharon.
So I would like to specifically focus on the hybrid learning model. I'm sure that there's a lot of other questions that can you hear me okay? Can I just ask?
Yes.
Okay, yeah. So I just want to focus on the hybrid learning model because I feel like that's the model that's been least well developed in the presentation. I think that we get a very clear understanding of what school will look like for the children who are in school half the time, but there's not a very clear understanding of what school looks like for the children who are out of school the other half of the time. And I think that we need to understand what remote learning looks like in a hybrid learning model when the instructor is instructing other children at the same time. So I think, because basically the way that it's presented right now, what's essentially been presented to us is like a 50% in-school time option without any real kind of picture of what out-of-school time looks like when they're supposed to be in school and participating remotely. Like, what is remote in a hybrid learning model as the district understands it? Is there essentially a separate academy? Do they have like 2 homerooms, more or less, like a remote instruction person and an in-person teacher? Or is there a teacher teaching them, through a video camera? Or are they, just doing project-based learning? Like, what is happening with these children half the time? I know that that's been a major concern that's been coming out of, I think, actually at least 3 of the expert advisory panels. There's been a lot of attention to what happens during at-home time in a hybrid scenario, so I don't think that the hybrid scenario really is a hybrid scenario right now. It's just sort of a half of a full-time scenario. The second question that I want to ask is specifically about the high school and whether or not and this may extend to middle school as well, but whether or not there are remote learning scenarios, and this is specifically for a remote learning model, in which dedicated carve-outs are made for instruction that needs to take place in facilities. Like, for example, could students spend 75% of their time in a remote instructional model, but come to school specifically for, say, science lab education, or any other kind of, any kind of like instructional scenario that requires specific physical infrastructure. And in that sense, you could have a distribution of time that's the time in school that can be kind of redistributed, and there's also kind of need driven that allows them to have the fullest possible instructional experience. Like, I spoke with, I think, a social studies educator who said, there isn't a physical reason for children to have to be in school other than sort of the classroom experience. It's quite different from like a science lab scenario, right? And so could we kind of push the remote learning model at the high school level, or for any instructional opportunities that require physical infrastructure below the high school level, like even further to like a 90-10 model, in order to make sure that children who really can't access instruction without physical infrastructure can access that instruction, but in a much more divided kind of way, right? Where you can still have 10 children in a lab,
doing whatever it is that they need to do in order to learn physics and chemistry and bio and everything. There's obviously so many more questions. I think that those two are really big, so I'll just stop there. Over.
Thanks, Sharon. So I can speak to your question about what remote learning looks like. I think that's a fair question. And then I'll kick it off to the high school to answer your question. And then we also have Jamie Yedoff here, who's our K-8 scheduling guru, which is why I asked her to come. So in terms of what remote learning would look like in a hybrid model, I can say for sure that it would be, it's not what our students got from March to June. So what we are looking at when we were breaking it out with principals last week, and Jamie, you can add a little bit more to this if you'd like, is that it would be much more structured and scheduled so that there would be more live teaching, synchronous teaching. There would be potentially one way that the principals were talking about it is more project-based learning, so that in the times that when you are not in school, you have specific assignments to work on with certain adults, that TBD. But it would be a different imagining of project-based learning that would still involve a lot of real-time interaction with adults and students. And then, Jim, you want to say something?
Can you just clarify, who is facilitating that while the instructor is teaching the other students?
Yeah, so we would, it wouldn't be simultaneous in that if you are in cohort A and you're in the building and you're learning math, cohort B is not also learning math. They're on an entirely different schedule. So what you're learning it would be different in terms of who's teaching.
And who would be supporting whatever it is the children are doing while cohort A is being taught math? So it's not going to be their teacher, right? It's not going to be their primary assigned teacher when they're in class, because their teacher is going to be teaching math to the other cohort. So who is providing instructional support to the children who are, if cohort A is in school, who is providing instructional support to cohort B at the same time?
Yeah. Am I going?
Thanks.
Go ahead. Yeah, Dr. Marina.
I think that is an outstanding question. And there are different districts are doing it in different ways. We clearly haven't, this is also going to be tied to some of the work we're going to be doing with the union. But I will say what other districts are doing in some ways. Let's take Casey's example. The in-school teacher has half the class and is teaching math. The other half of her class is at home. What are they doing? And who's teaching them? Well, in a lot of other districts, a lot of the specials are happening at that point, so that those students are receiving their physical education classes virtually. It has to be filled out. They could be doing art and with the art teacher teaching that particular piece, or the guidance counselors could be working with them. And then we're going to be looking at, because I'm a little over my skis here, but we're going to be looking at some of the ancillary staff that can oversee connected projects, as well as the not just projects that develop, on the spot, but that the core teacher would be developing projects that coincide with what's happening in class. That's what's happening in other districts. But I think we need to keep asking that question, and we can't avoid that question, because that question is going to be central as to whether you can make a hybrid actually work in a way that students are getting a quality education. It can't just be fill time. They have to have quality education. And that's for us, that's where the work rests with us. Keep asking that question, Sharon. Don't let us off the hook. That's an important question. Not that you'd let us off the hook. I understand.
Yeah, do we want
Anthony and Hal?
Yeah.
I would just echo Sharon's first question, which is essentially does 50%, 50% of in-school time result in 50% of the curriculum and instruction? And that's our chief concern around hybrid is how to not have that be the case. We think that that is not acceptable for students or families or staff at the high school level. And, you know, I'm not speaking to K to 8 because that's not my area of expertise, but we, you know, certainly a fair criticism of last spring was that students received less of an educational experience. They received less content. And so, Sharon, you began to speak to potential solutions. And I would say it's a little, you know, Dr. Marini mentioned that there are pieces here that need to be negotiated, but I think we think about how you could give access or greater access to all of the instruction to students so it wasn't 2.5 days out. Hal, do you want to speak to some of the preliminary schedule? I can say I agree with Casey that it made sense to give you a blank schedule, but we have some very drafty drafts around what that schedule would look like if we were to do hybrid 2.5 in, 2.5 out. Hal?
Yeah, and I think some of the things that we're trying to look at are exactly the questions that you're asking. And it also is about the teacher load. If I have a teacher who's teaching half of her class on a Monday, where am I going to get the teaching capacity to teach the entire class? If it's, you know, if I split every class in half and I have a cohort A and a cohort B, but it's really one class of 25 kids, let's say, I can't double my teaching capacity in order to satisfy that, nor do I want to really create a situation where that teacher is reteaching the same things over and over to what should be one class. So these are certainly the questions we're looking at in hybrid, and we have some ideas for how that might get addressed. But you know, a drafty draft is a good way to describe it at this point.
Amy, did you want to jump in about scheduling at middle school?
Sure. I would just echo everything that the prior several speakers have said. It is impossible for a teacher to do two jobs at once and do them both well. We cannot ask teachers to be teaching half a math class in person and half a math class remotely unless we have an additional staff person in the room to facilitate that learning, and that comes with an expense. So to answer your question, Sharon, I think part of why that isn't as fleshed out as perhaps it would be satisfying to see is because we don't know what all of our constraints are yet. And so we could spend all day going down rabbit holes, planning for 1,000 different what ifs, but until we have some solid ground on which to build, it's really not a good use of our time. We need to keep thinking about what the challenge is and what some possible solutions are. And then once we've actually settled on a solution, that's when we start the deep work of building the plan.
Yeah, okay. Barbara, then yeah, we'll get everybody. Barbara?
It occurs to me that what we may need to do is have every class have 2 different teachers. There are certain things that probably will work better if they are done in the classroom with the teacher. For example, science. It's harder to do science experiments at home. And math. Maybe every class has 2 teachers, which means that in a sense, that would mean more staffing. But if you could get your your social studies and at least some of your language arts, like you could do a book discussion, which is very common as part of your language arts program, with a Zoom meeting. You don't have to be there in person. So maybe we need to look more carefully at what really needs to have teachers and students in the same place, and then have other subjects all taught online. I don't know how that would affect staffing. I haven't thought that out. But if one teacher is working with 2 groups of students for basically math and science, in the course of a week, she would have 2 different groups. Though that since the groups are smaller, it might not work. Then you could have other teachers doing the social studies and language arts. I think we have to think about what works remotely better than some things which we're clear will not work remotely.
Thank you, Barbara. Jennifer?
I have a few questions. I do want to sort of echo, one of my big questions was about balancing our teachers in person and who's leading the work remotely. Are we having the same teacher? Are you splitting into two teachers? If we're talking about doubling staff, there are a lot of budgetary implications for that. I don't even know if we can do that. So I guess my first question is sort of like, are negotiations underway for an MOU? Are we there yet? Have we begun that work? My second question is, when will we have the information on the ventilation prior to our vote? Because there's a lot of information that we don't yet have that we're going to need and probably have questions on before I would feel comfortable with the vote. Ventilation being one of them if we're considering any sort of kids or adults in buildings. I heard mention at the beginning, we were talking about 180 days and we were expecting, I don't know where I've come across this information, but I thought it had already been approved to go down to 170, but I didn't see that reflected in the presentation. So I was just confused and would like to just get some clarification, and whether that's 170 days for students or staff. And so does that give us the 10 days of prep time at the beginning of the year, and have we had any conversations about what we might do with those 10 days? Another question, this is sort of very specific. Are we ordering, in the numbers we ordered for wipes, and when I hear alcohol wipes, I'm wondering if they are sufficient enough to the version of like Clorox wipes that so many teachers are used to using in their classrooms. Did we order enough product for teachers to be able to be continuously cleaning their rooms or having students clean the rooms based on the recommendations from the CDC? Or are we expecting teachers and or families to supply them as we have in years past? I find that I'm concerned, especially if we know that we need them and that they're hard to get. I just don't think we can rely on that. So I just want to make sure that we've ordered enough for that, like constantly wiping down type of stuff. I'm not sure if this is a comment or a question, but I am concerned about the 3 feet for students. And I'm wondering if the district has a rationale for why we're using the 3 feet DESI guideline instead of the 6 feet CDC guidelines that I'm somewhat more comfortable with. And if we're recommending that BEEP to first grade, we're recommending masks, how are we going to keep educators and students and then therefore all of their family members safe if small children are not using masks? I'm very concerned about that. And I have another question, which is, how are we defining as a district high needs students? I saw that on the slides and I just wanted to confirm what our parameters are for high needs students. And I know that's a lot of questions, I'm sorry, but this might be my one chance to ask them.
Well, let me take the first one on the 10 days. Going from 180 to 170, 180 to 175 was first floated. I've heard the same things that you have, but I can tell you there is nothing official that has come to me at this point. I definitely would be anticipating that it'll go 175 minimum, and there's lots of talk about the 170, but we don't have anything official. How those days, and those are the student days, and how those days get used is yet to be determined. I would talk with people about not using all those days at once at the beginning, because things change, and we will need to use those days for planning purposes periodically as we go through. Once we make a decision, we are going to have to have operated under some assumptions in terms of going forward and planning accordingly, knowing that we have to be nimble, but we're going to need to reserve some of those days for changes as they occur. Okay, Matt, do you want to go with the PPE? You're muted, Matt.
Sorry about that. Can you hear me now? All right, I'm seeing the bobblehead. Thank you. So first, for cleaning products, we ordered 2 items for classrooms that teachers could use to clean. One is a disinfectant spray that they were using before we left, called QT Plus, and that will kill the virus. Not recommending that they use that while students are in the room, but if they want to clean up afterwards or clean up before, just for their own peace of mind, the product will be there for them. We haven't gotten to the point where it would be required or expected, but I think in this type of situation, we want to have the materials there and ready. And for the people that want to participate, definitely want to have them there. The other one is a neutral base cleaner, peroxide based. It's called Suprox. It has a zero ratio across the board for all health and safety risks. I think everybody's kind of familiar with peroxide, whether they put it on a cut or used it as a dental rinse. It does clean, and that would be for sort of spraying and wipe desks. Students wouldn't necessarily be asked to use it, but it could be used with students in the room, and there really shouldn't be a health risk or a problem. We've ordered additional hand soap, hand sanitizer, alcohol wipes, cleaning products, and we'll be ordering some more gloves, for that type of thing as well. So we're fairly confident that we can, one, keep the building clean and the spaces clean, and two, disinfect more frequently if we need to. We'd definitely be doing that at the end of the day. We'd have to do it for transitions into extended day for the early elementary programs. And that's one of the things that we'd need to kind of finalize in a more formal fashion than what we were doing before. But if our attendance prior to shutdown was any indicator, our attendance was better than average the several weeks leading up to when the state shut down, because everybody was washing their hands more, and the custodians were wiping down touch points, and everybody was being a little more vigilant. So it worked pretty well. It just didn't work for necessarily stopping the spread across the state, because I don't think everybody was doing as good of a job as Brookline was, to be honest with you. If I missed, I share an office with several people, so occasionally people grab my attention. And so if I missed the question about the PPE for the staff, could you repeat it, Jennifer?
No, I'm assuming that we have PPE for staff. So that was an assumption I was making. It was more of a question about whether or not in the purchase of sort of like wipes and things like that people may want to access during the day to continue to keep this, saying we clean before students come in after, what's going to happen during the day. And that was my question, was more, I guess it is for staff, but
it's for everybody. It's the students and the staff. I understand your question. One of the things that we did order that we hadn't really used in the past was an alcohol-based wipe. Alcohol kills the virus on contact. It can also be used on keyboards and other things. Not commonly used. More often, people would use a Clorox wipe or a Lysol wipe. And if anybody ever read the directions, they want you to put on, goggles and gloves and wipe and let it sit there for 4 to 10 minutes, depending on the product, and then wipe it dry. I don't know anybody that has ever done that. Everybody just takes it right out of the canister. I mean, I even have one on my desk, nearby, just so people know that I can relate to do so. Don't really want to discourage parents from making donations, but I don't think we're going to be more ready this time around than we were last time around. And to get wipes and some of the product is really difficult, because the request rate for some of these things has gone up 10 to 100-fold, and the market takes time to equilibrate, and companies that weren't making, whether it be masks or gloves or chemical disinfectants or creating tests for the disease, that weren't doing this, whether it was 2 months ago or 6 months ago, like they're changing and things are getting there. But that's why we've sort of ordered a lot of stuff in advance. And we had a decent amount of stuff from when we shut down, because we knew we were going through it quicker. And so we ordered more. But the two...
And I'm going to jump in. Can you just finish?
Yeah, the two most important things for sort of controlling the spread of the virus are wearing the mask and frequent hand washing, and then the cleaning of the space is something that the staff will mostly take care of as custodial staff.
So Jennifer, to your question about ventilation information, capital subcommittees meeting tomorrow, is it, Helen? And we're going to talk about that. So
no, we're meeting on Wednesday.
I'm sorry, Wednesday.
Wednesday, 2:30 to 4:30.
Okay, so that's one of our big topics. Helen's big topic. She's the chair. In terms of high needs, Casey just put a whole list for you on the chat, so we can move that along. Thank you, Casey. That was very helpful. In terms of, let's see, I'm looking at some of your other questions. Small children and masks. Regina, did you want to respond? Sure.
I think I'm unmuted now.
Yeah.
I had the pleasure this morning of spending some time over at the Runkle School, where we are having ESY with our most vulnerable students. And I was, I want to say pleasantly surprised, but I'll probably add the word astonished there too, about how competent and cooperative our youngest students were in keeping their masks on. I have to hand it to the parents because they came in even the first week with an understanding that they were needed to wear a mask. And we have reinforced that, but I was really surprised. I thought it was going to be a bigger uphill battle. Sure, there will be challenges. We, make social stories for students. We support them. We give them mask breaks, all of those things. But I feel a lot better that this will not be as big a challenge as we were expecting. Other things, I think we should focus our energy on other parts of the problem, which will be quite significant.
I just want to add on to what Regina said quickly, Jennifer, is ESY, which has gone along swimmingly, has been a good pressure test for us with that. And I would say that we most, and I mean over 90%, because the administrators there sort of take count, are over 90% are compliant with wearing their face masks. We also have been looking into an option for clear masks too. I know it's a sort of a different need, but while we're on masks, just want to make sure we put that out there too, where we've had some recommendations for clear masks to be ordered for our both adults and students.
And then Jennifer, I think two other questions you had. One is MOU with the union. I don't know, Jim, if you want to just say a word about that. I think it's just an ongoing conversation.
I think we will be starting the process of an MOU. I've spoken about it briefly with the union president, but we haven't set a date to actually do that. I would like to meet with the school committee prior to that so that we can have some, it's negotiations, so we should go into executive sessions, have some discussion about that first.
And then the last thing I think you mentioned was actually your first, which is, do we need to double the number of teachers? I think that's still in, I'm sure that won't happen, but I'm sure figuring out which teachers will cover which classes and how that will work out is still to be determined. So I don't think, unless somebody has an answer on that one.
No, I think that I heard from the answer to Sharon's question earlier that I don't think we're there yet with the answer to that. We haven't sort of flushed that all out. So I'm sort of just bringing it back up as like, I think that's a big piece of the work in figuring out models and going forward. It's like, okay, now what does that look like? How can we even make that happen? The other question I had was sort of the 3 feet versus 6 feet rule. And I only bring it up because I know that other districts are going with the 6 feet rule. And so I just, I'm looking for our rationalization for why or why not. I mean, we might change. It didn't sound like it was decided. I want to recognize that in the presentation, there were columns with different options, a 3 foot and a 6 foot option. And so I'm not hearing that we've necessarily decided that, but I would just put it out there that other districts are definitely going with a 6 feet. So just, I would like us to think about that, because I think 3 feet, if it's, to me, and not to be sort of like fresh about it, but like if we can be waiting in line for bagels and it's 6 feet apart, then like different schools should have that same space.
Just briefly, we put 3 to 6 feet in the presentation because that's the range that we've been asked to look at. I personally would be advocating a 6-foot distance. The reason for that is if you separate students out at 3 feet, you would have to keep them pretty much stationary around that 3 feet. There's very little flexibility when you're crossing into narrowing that gap. If you have 6 feet, you have some flexibility. They could walk into the 3-foot distance and still be safe. But with the 3 foot, unless they were nailed down, I don't think they're going to be safe.
Thanks for listening to all my questions and answering them.
Go ahead, Susan.
So first of all, I know we are all jumping in with incredibly detailed questions, and I have 11D9 questions also, but I just wanted to first pause and take a deep breath and say thank you to our building-based leaders in particular. We get a lot of chance to thank people on the 5th floor, but Jamie, Regina, Hal, Anthony, and all of your principal, vice principal, department head colleagues, like we are facing probably the biggest crisis in public education in this country's history. And I don't think that's actually an exaggeration. I think it's actually true. And I couldn't imagine 4 people who I would rather see on the Zoom call right now. So just thank you. Thank you for everything you've done and all the crap you're about to put up with over the next 6 months. So just on that note, I just want to say that this is going to cost a lot more, right? And I know there are such high expectations in this town about the quality of education, the quality of the experience. And it's teachers have high expectations. Everyone on this call has high expectations, the parents, and we owe it to the kids. But I just want to make sure that if there's anything that you all can think of that we can do, you are all building leaders, that we can do to sort of create a culture of full partnership among all of the different stakeholders so that we all feel like we are doing this together. And when we don't know what something is going to be, or when things are not going to be 100% right, just how do we really approach this from the point of view of all being in the same boat and not sort of, circular firing squad style. So just it's more like a culture and a parent and a faculty leadership question, which you may not have the full answer to right now, but if you have reflections from this past spring as to what worked and didn't work and just any ideas you have, or I think that's important. The masks and the screens are all important, and we're gonna have 2 more hours on it Wednesday, but as I think about like the core in educational instruction, if we are all talking about masks and plexiglass, like it just feels like at some point the center of gravity has to shift over to the educational side of this. And so I guess what I would say, and this is true on the panels also, the panels have been spending a tremendous amount of time on safety questions, even the ones that are focused on learning. So I guess my question is more of sort of a process question about the next couple of weeks. How much can we realistically get done by August 6th and August 10th? As you think about, I'd like to make sure the principals in particular, or Hal, have a really clear role to play in the MOA development process, because you guys were the ones that experienced it on the front lines last year, not the school committee. We all experienced it from 2 clicks away. And so I guess it's really more of kind of a process, leadership, culture set of questions. And I just want to make sure that there's anything we can do to help keep the focus, keep the sort of conversation and center of gravity on the fact that this is going to require more money and more resources, and sort of how we can keep that elevated. Jim, I'm sure you have a bunch of ideas, but I'd love to just talk about that a little bit and how we're going to kind of get on that side, on that track, how we're going to get sort of to August 10th and beyond.
Suzanne, if I could just give a quick to that. In terms of the MOU, Susan, great comments. At the leadership retreat, we asked the principals to take a look at opening under a hybrid, which is sort of a daunting task. And what would you need in the MOU in order to be successful in bringing in the education at the quality that you want? What do you need to see in the MOU? We collected that information. That's going to inform us. So thank you. And I talked to Mel about money. And so I'll be back at them.
Does anyone else want to respond to Susan? Any of our, yeah, Regina?
Yes, Anthony and I just spent 3 days with the principals and Dr. Marini and the senior leadership team. And while, you know, Susan, I agree with you, we're spending a lot of time on the nuts and bolts of how to keep people safe and the health aspects of it. We did also spend some time thinking about the curriculum and aspects of the curriculum that need to be adjusted, may need to be put on hold, and those which need to be emphasized in a hybrid type model, and in specifically helping students with social emotional learning as they return to school, the challenges associated with building community in a remote or partially remote environment and how to sustain that over time, teaching students early in the school year the technology skills that they need, as well as the parents. So all of those things are things we're thinking about as prerequisites to participating in either a hybrid or a virtual model that will need to happen as we're opening schools simultaneously. And then, you know, sure, there are a lot of logistical issues regarding how does each child have their own math manipulatives? And, you know, teachers are coming to me saying, okay, well, Target has these $1 boxes. Should I buy like 3 for each student for each different subject material? So teachers are percolating ideas. They're sort of filtering them through their administrators. But we are, I agree, a little obsessed right now with the health and safety aspects until a decision is made. But we are also beginning those curriculum discussions.
I would build on that, Regina. That's all well said. I would build on that from a high school perspective, and I think similar work is happening pre-K to 12. At BHS, we were fortunate to receive an Innovation Fund grant, which featured a team of 30 educators, so teachers in the core academics and curriculum coordinators from the core academics, and also an elective coordinator. And we asked them to reflect on the spring and say, what do we need? And the beauty of the public schools of Brookline is when, as leaders, we listen carefully to the people doing the most important work day in and day out, and that is our educators, and that includes guidance and social workers. But they essentially said, Hal and Anthony, we appreciate your leadership last spring. Here's what we need from you. We need 3 things, and these need to be required of all educators. They are developing community. So a saving grace last year was that we had several months with our kids. We will not, if we start remote as a possibility, we won't have those same relationships. So what does that mean to explicitly and methodically develop community, especially with high schoolers who are probably a little skeptical of any of our attempts to try to do that? But I think we're going all in with supporting our teachers around developing community within the classroom, beyond the classroom. And Regina spoke to these other 2 things. We are mandating one digital learning platform, which nobody has ever said that about Brookline High School in the 16 years that I've been there, meaning we have a lot of autonomy. We understand the power of autonomy for how overwhelming this experience can be for kids to be navigating multiple platforms. And just to be clear, we're unified. Nicole Gittens sent out a memo saying that that's going to be a requirement. It's also what our team of educators said needed to happen. We needed to all wrap ourselves around Canvas and all use it. And then that to me is a reasonable directive to ask of teachers. And the final piece, and I think Regina spoke some to this as well, is we are going to explicitly teach executive functioning. And in the spring, I'll say it was, and this is probably not the best way to describe it, but it was a bit catch as catch can. Some teachers did a lot of work around that. Some students received a ton of support around executive functioning, others less so. We are going to split up that work across departments and make very clear which departments are offering which aspects of executive functioning that are needed for next year. So all that to say, that work that you're getting at, which is teachers thinking about learning and teaching and relationship as foundational, that is ongoing through the summer. And I have great faith in our teachers. I think, to your point, there are a lot of difficult issues to wrestle with around health and safety and which model we end up with. But I do believe teachers are very much working on, and to me, more importantly, pushing us and saying, this is what we need. And that's good guidance for us and good feedback.
Thank you. Regina?
Yeah, just one more comment. I failed to say that I do know that the Office of Teaching and Learning, and specifically Michelle Herman and Mary Brown, have been working all through the summer on identifying essential curriculum also for all of the teachers. So while the teachers are working on their individual classrooms and the logistics of that, the curriculum coordinators have been working on identifying essential units and the order in which they will be supported by the departments. So I think that work is going on as we focus on the other pieces too.
So just to follow up, I guess and maybe this is a question for Jim as much as anything, but as we think about sort of the work that we just described is going to be ongoing past the start of school, right? It's going to be going on for certainly the beginning of school. How do we start to think about a plan, a budget, resources in that environment, and what can the school committee do to be? I'm trying to kind of put our timeline. Tether our timeline to your timeline in terms of finance and curriculum and all those different pieces.
Yeah, a great question. And much of that hinges on this 180, 175, 170 day, because the whole point of that from the commissioner at his last town meeting that he had was to say he recognizes that there has to be planning. Lots of districts don't have money to pay teachers now. So he's planning on providing some relief on those days so it can be an all-in 100% planning for exactly the kinds of things. I mean, the table has been set, so to speak. Regina's right. The essential standards and what kids need to know and be able to do at each grade level, how it connects to the previous grade and the next grade, will speak to the stuff that Hal, I think, and Anthony are concerned about. Is my curriculum now being truncated and will the kids get an education? The essential standards are supposed to address that, but the time and the money at this point is targeted for coming out of those 180 days. But we'll know that really soon. And then I think if there are other resources that are necessary, we're going to need to come back to you and maybe even the state to see what kind of resources are going to be available. It's a concern across the state, and all I can tell you is that it's a front burner issue that I don't have the answer for.
Okay. Thank you.
Oops. Mariah? Okay, then Helen.
Thank you. So I was listening to all this, and I resonated with what Susan said a minute ago about this being just such a fundamental change and shift into everything we've been doing. And I wanted to call, and really just nothing like we expect education to be. And I wanted to call out a couple of things that that really struck me. One is that on all the schedules that were provided, the school day ends at noon. It doesn't go until 2:30. Did I get that correct, Casey? Yeah. So it ends at noon. And so that already is 2.5 hours off of the day. It's not just for going from 180 days to 170 days. It's for going from 180 days at 6.5-ish hours a day to 170 at 4. So there's a big number that's going down there. And the other thing that we haven't talked about is at all, I think, is extended day. And for families who need to work, what does it mean? Even if you're quote unquote in a hybrid model and you have week A where you have school, but actually your kid's only going to school 4 hours a day, what does that mean, right? So so there's the education, but then there's how it fits in with the sort of holistic view of family well-being and family support, and all of that I don't hear yet sort of addressed, or it's just a big gaping hole in this, at least in the presentation so far. I had a question about, this is about the timeline, Casey, that I think was on your last slide. When you say that school would be remote for the first 2 months, is that remote for everybody, including K2, including English language, including special education kids, or is that not the case?
So I can answer that one first, and then we can circle back to your first question. So if it is in the timeline on slide towards the end for remote learning, it would be, I believe, I'm just trying to work through the different models that we have in my head right now, but it would be BEEP and then our students with the highest needs who would be in person.
But not necessarily all of K through 2.
Correct.
Okay, I just wanted to get clarity from that. You need to wait a minute. Sorry.
And then here, yeah.
Well, do you want me to ask the rest of my questions? Is that okay? And then you might want to answer them all.
Sure. I will try to remember them all. Go ahead.
Well, so the first one was about noon. My second question is about outdoors and in person. Here seems to be. I'm sorry, I have a 3-year-old fighting with me right now. In person, meaning in school as opposed to outdoors, and there didn't really seem to be any serious consideration beyond performing arts and gym for outdoors, whereas I would think that that would be, and I really feel strongly that that would be something that we should be looking at much more extensively. Then my next question is about special education and English language push-in and pull-out services, and how those fit into hybrid, particularly hybrid, but any scenario. And then my last question is family commitment and teacher commitment. There was a comment at one point of, I think it was Erin who said that we're going to have a survey in the next couple of weeks where families need to commit to something. And my question is, to what extent are families and I would expect, well, so to what extent are families bound to whatever they pick? If I was to say, I want my kids to be all remote this year, but then things get better, like, am I forced? Like, what are they being asked to choose at that point, and how binding is that choice? And similarly, are we doing a request of teachers to find out, for example, which teachers feel that they should only be in a remote teaching model, and to what extent is that binding? If they were to choose to return, or they want to be in person and then they decide to opt out of being in person. So what is that? So those are my questions.
Okay, great. So let me tick down. So in terms of the ending of noon, that's not a hard and fast end time right now. That was just to illustrate or just to see, could we do a partial day and still allow time for teacher prep time and cleaning to happen? There wasn't unanimous agreement from the principals that noon was a good time, because, there was, well, I want to fit in this, and could we look at 1 o'clock dismissal instead? So 1 is not, 12 o'clock is not hard and fast. The BHS schedule does have a full day, Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, and Friday in the proposed hybrid. In terms of outdoors, we did focus a lot on what we can do within the buildings to sort of complete that pressure test coming from DESE. We did have some discussions in terms of renting tents and looking at spaces outside, but beyond that, we haven't done too much outside of recognizing that should be an option. To teach outside, but whether there are a lot of things that I think we have to talk through, because there's just so many things that we can't control for, and how do we plan for that. In terms of push-in and pull-out services for special ed and English learners, a lot has to do with cohorting the students, which is where it is not the most desirable, because we lose. What we do now is we try to, as much as possible, equally distribute students in special ed and English learners so that they get the full inclusionary experience, so that we get that heterogeneous spread in each of our classrooms. But in order to make services work in a hybrid model, we may have to group more special ed students in a cohort than what we would normally do if we were all in. And right now, depending on the needs of the students, they would either be pulled out in person for students with higher needs, or a special educator could remotely push in, which we did see some of that happening in the spring. And then I believe most of our academic learning services for ESY this year are remote. So we are trying to take lessons from that to see what's working and what's not.
I think you had a question on extended day. I think Mariah did. Do you have any?
Yeah, we don't have any updates now in terms of extended day, because the principals really need to look into spaces in their buildings to see if we would need to be using any of the extended day spaces that are in the buildings for the regular school day.
And what about the question about family commitment, and to what extent is it binding? And similarly for teachers.
Casey, do you want me to take that?
I should probably take that.
Okay.
Yeah, and in terms of making a commitment, they would need to make a commitment for a semester, because it can't be and we have to be flexible, because individual cases sometimes trump a hard and fast rule under these conditions. But in order to have planning, we have to have some level of reliability in terms of the distribution of staff. We don't even know. I get requests from teachers who have concerns about next year. So that's why, Aaron, we need to go back and do more surveys and get from the teachers more specifics about their own personal circumstances. If they have, if they're high risk category or whatever it's going to be that prevents them from coming in, how do we accommodate that? And hopefully those who need to be remote and teachers can be teaching in a remote setting. But in terms of, it can't allow for back and forth without a lot of notice and because now I'm going to try, I didn't have it, I'm going to try. It will need to be thought out, and it will need to have some level of commitment so we can actually begin implementing things with reliability. That's why I'm going to be asking for everyone to, once something is decided, you got to work with us on this so that we can make it work, and we'll be back on a pretty consistent way in terms of reviewing and making adjustments appropriately as required, because conditions on the ground change as well. So the short answer to your question is we'll be asking for a commitment for a semester, and then we can go from there.
Helen, would you like to jump in?
Very much so. Thank you. I actually have 4 questions and then a comment, but I'd like each one answered individually rather than going through the whole questions, because I think it's easier that way. I'll start with the high school, because I'm not clear how you do 2 days on, 2 days off with many different classes. What is your thought of what the day will look like for a student? And Anthony's not listening, but Hal is good.
I'm with you. So a kid would be in a class, and it would meet during, so it's an algebra class, it's meeting during B block, and they would be in that class on Monday and Tuesday. And the other half of that class would be in the other cohort, and therefore would be remote. And they would meet with the teacher in person on Thursday and Friday, for example, during that same B block time. So it's one class, half the kids come on Monday and Tuesday, the other half come on Thursday and Friday.
So I'm a student who has 7 different classes. Do I then have 7 different groups of kids that I'm with throughout the day?
Well, one of the things from the DESE guidance that they asked us to do was to minimize that, was to put kids in much smaller clusters. They actually use the term schools within a school. Not gonna turn that just more confusing. But they want us to put clusters. So I've been looking at it, and over the course of July, I looked a lot at how I could manage clusters to minimize movement. There's no way I could get kids into one room and just move a teacher in. That's never going to happen.
Mm-hmm.
But I can get kids into a hallway. I can get 90% of the kids that would stay within a specific hallway, with the exception, of course, going to science class, going upstairs. So the idea is to minimize the contact, which is in line with what Desi asked us.
And have you looked at outdoor classrooms for kids at the high school?
Yeah, we haven't looked.
Really? No.
But we've considered, I mean, we had a preliminary conversation, Helen, with Aaron Shute-Galentine just about the field, and that's something we've always kind of just used mostly for lunch. But, she was open to that and talked with us briefly about permitting. We also, we've got the quadrangle, though we're an active construction site as well. So we've had some beginning conversations around that. The one thing I would just speak to, not about outdoor space, but what you were just mentioning, the example you had was if a student has 7 classes, I can say that as much as Brookline High School has an incredible course catalog, one of the challenges of last spring was kids trying to manage 7 courses. And so we think while the offerings we have are still incredibly important and, central to who we are, we think narrowing the choices for this year makes sense. And so saying there are 5, quote, academic classes and every student is taking an elective and every student is taking a wellness or some sort of on an athletic team, that we think that speaks to the whole child and is more manageable within the larger environment. So just know that that's something we've begun to think about and work with our district leaders around that possibility.
Okay, my second question had to do with cameras in the classroom, or using the classroom teacher as teaching with the cohort that's there, but the second part of that cohort watching, whether it be at the high school or in the elementary schools, what's going on in the classroom. Why not think about that? Because we're not going to have the money for 2 teachers to split a class. We're just not going to have it, no matter how much money we get. So why not take the opportunity of the teacher who's teaching there, being the synchronous teaching for those kids who aren't there in the classroom?
We've started to look at that preliminarily, Helen. We discussed it last week with Casey. I mean, the ideal scenario, or one of the possible scenarios, I should say, is sort of those three-dimensional smart cameras that follows a voice that can be used within Zoom and could potentially bring kids from the remote environment into the classroom environment.
And this would be an investment that if, in the future, kids can't participate in school, they have an ability to participate in this way because we would have that infrastructure.
Yes.
Available.
Yeah. You're absolutely right, Helen. In addition to what Hal said, I'd note too that the K-8 principals also want to explore that as an option.
Okay, great.
I would just add to that, Helen. So yes, we've begun to think about that across the district. I think the one, there's several potential pushback aspects to that around opening up our classrooms in that way. The other piece that is compelling for me is to be wary of how much screen time we're asking of students. And so thinking very carefully instructionally as well as the learner experience of what that would mean for kids in terms of how much time they're spending trying to follow synchronous learning. And so trying to be creative about how we think about chunks of time within the schedule, though certainly the advantage of having not just 50% instructional time or learning time is hugely advantageous, and thus our interest in it, knowing that there are going to be some hesitations to work through.
Right, and there may be ways of, having spark breaks and stuff like that people can do, that they can put into the class. Okay, so that was the cameras, the high school schedule. The thing that still gets me, and maybe this is for Jim, what happens? Teachers are living in one district, have kids who go to one school, and they're teaching on a different schedule in our district. What do you do?
Well, the commissioner has actually addressed that.
Yes.
And I was on a call with Needham and Newton this morning, and that decision has not definitively been made, and I think there are complications. But essentially, the commissioner at the last call said, if you live in Brookline and you teach in Newton and you have two different systems in place, if your job says that this is a day that you're teaching live, and at home your children are at home in Brookline, then Brookline would have to take your children into school in classes. They would go to class so that you wouldn't have to worry about who's at home with your children. You can go to work, your children go to school.
Well, if you're working full time, how do you?
Even your children will have to be in school that time. So that hasn't been completely resolved. There are mega issues that go along with it, but the commissioner is looking at that as a possible way of providing relief for teachers who are in a different district, not having to worry about childcare or even supervision while they're off working. Needless to say, he hasn't declared that as a guideline yet. And there's lots of people who try to play it out and see how it will play itself out, and it's very complicated, and it gets to be, you have in some cases teachers who now do not have to be concerned about supervision for their children, and they can go teach in another district. But if you're not a teacher and you can't go to work because you have to have supervision for your children, that creates another conflict that the education community can ill afford. So I don't know how it's going to come out, but the good news is people are thinking about it. The bad news is there's no solution at this point.
I mean, it really becomes a problem if we have an all-in system, and
that's right.
Which I'm hoping we will in some way.
At some
that's
point.
a safe one. But that's where the real, I think, and even hybrid. I mean, the only way that it works for remote, I guess, if everybody goes remote, but not preferable. The other, this is just a thought in terms of METCO. There are some METCO parents who are able to transport their kids. The cost of having an extra bus is can be quite costly. If there are ways to know how many parents might be willing to or could transport their kids, we might to fill a bus the appropriate way and still get everybody. I'm sure you guys have been thinking about that, but that I think we need to sort of ask, because if we don't ask, we don't know. And the last thing, just to sort of show my own preference, I think, when you talked about the pre-K through 2 being all in school, that really resonated with me in some ways. Because, coming into kindergarten, never knowing a teacher in the school. Can you hear me still? Because this says, yeah. Never, knowing a teacher, never having been in a school, it's really difficult, I think, at that age, whereas kids who are older are sort of used to new teachers every year and may know them even. So I would certainly, think about that seriously. That's all I have. Thank you.
Andy or David? Andy?
Sure. I think I'll just confine myself to one question at this stage, which is about sort of the meaning of a phased reopening and how what that amounts to for our district. It seems to me the question of whether a building is safe to occupy, it's not a black and white thing, right? Probably in each of our buildings, we have some spaces that are going to be ready in September, others that might take a longer time, and some that will never be okay to use during a pandemic. So I'm wondering, is the expectation that sort of as the fall goes on, more and more spaces might become usable and we could bring back more and more kids? Or is the thinking more that, whatever we have on September 1st, that's just kind of what we work with for the entire semester?
Yeah, thanks for asking that, Andy. So it's the former. It allows us to better assess each of our spaces while also getting more information, very up-to-date current information about the trajectory of the pandemic, current Brookline numbers, and whatever the state guidance is.
I guess part of what I'm asking is, like, do we have a lot of spaces in the buildings? And maybe this is a really question for Matt, that are like where we can't really get them ready by September, but that the more extensive work that would be needed could happen during the fall, so that we can expect more kids to be back in December than in September.
So Andy, to that question, I think we're going to have some feedback on Wednesday with an engineer that's very familiar with our systems and the HVAC and the airflow, and feedback from the expert advisory panel. I'll call it the Chan School of Health Advisory Panel, in a tongue-in-cheek way. That's where a lot of the folks, and I'm grateful and thankful to have them, are giving us feedback on how we can do things better. So I think that'll make kind of a big difference. And the Windows inventory should finish up tomorrow. We're about half done, and as we're speaking, the high school and Baker are being inventoried right now.
David, do you have some comments or questions?
Yes, some questions. So I want to dovetail mine somewhat off of Mariah's about deadlines for teacher commitment and for family commitment. I think it's very important that we get some idea as to what those numbers will look like so that we can fully flesh out all of the planning. So I'm a little concerned that we're roughly 5 weeks from the start of school and we still don't have sort of the even macro level answers in terms of which model or combination of models. I think one way that we could start to answer those questions even now without all that data would be to try to devise some objective criteria by which certain decisions would be made. So for example, if we think that there's a certain level of community spread that would make us more comfortable with switching to a fully remote model or from an all-in model to hybrid, depending what that is, we might want to look at indexing certain objective criteria to decisions we might want to make. And that way we can have, we can make contingency plans right now, because a lot of families want to know what's going to happen under various scenarios. And understandably, we can't completely answer that question given that the circumstances are constantly evolving. But if we do have in our minds, or as some sort of procedural framework, an understanding of we will do, if A happens, we will do B. If C happens, we will do D. I think that would help a lot of families gain clarity. So I'm wondering what type of work has been put into contingency planning of that nature.
So I can speak to that a little bit. So we do have some guidance, additional guidance from DESE that actually lays out for you some contingency plans. So if a student gets sick with COVID symptoms, here's what you do at the classroom level, at the school level, and then also has a communication plan laid out also. And then, of course, if there is a staff member who's sick or you have more than X number, here's what you do. So we do have some of that laid out, but in terms of some of the metrics that you said we would be comfortable, we would have to dig into that. And you're right on the time crunch. We have certainly been working under the gun over the last couple of weeks. And unfortunately, I think it's where a lot of other districts are now too, responding to a lot of this and making decisions as quickly as possible, but then being as informed as possible. So we would need to have those metrics set, and this is where some of the expert panels would come into play too.
Another question I have is with regards to special education and delivering services to that student population. I'm not sure if I heard you correctly, but I think in your answer to someone else, you mentioned something about having larger cohorts than we might like for special education students. Could you elaborate on what you meant by that?
Yeah, sure. So if we do a hybrid model, so I guess let me tell you what we did when we were fully open. What we, in assigning students with IEPs to classrooms, we would try to evenly distribute them across the classrooms in all of the grades. But because we are not allowed to mix students in a hybrid model, or the DESE guidance is saying that students have to be cohorted. So in order to pull students out for IEP services, a special educator would have to pull from one class versus 4 different 3rd grade classes. Because now you have the, X number of students coming from 4 different classes mixing into one class, which we can't do anymore. So what would happen now then is that we would have to take those 10 or 12 students in special ed in 3rd grade and put them in one classroom. Which then, of course, we're questioning our inclusionary practices. So there are some cost benefits to this, to the hybrid model for sure. Does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, so actually I'm the last one to go this round, and actually a lot of what I have has already been brought up, so I'll just list them or name them. You don't necessarily have to respond, but just so people know they're on my mind. So I would say on that 3 feet versus 6 feet, if we go hybrid and our classrooms are half the number of students, it's going to be easier to get the 6 feet than the 3 feet. I mean, it'll be easy, yes, right, because you'll have half the number of kids in the classroom. So I think that will work its way out. I am concerned about the ending at noon, is that if 4 hours is considered a full day as far as DESE is concerned. So do we get full day credit if they go from 8 to noon? Or do they need to be there longer? I forget what that number is that they have to be in school. Erin, you know?
I'm not sure off the top of my head what the exact number is. However, if you look at any of the models, the examples that Casey presented, the in-person school day ends at noon, but students are expected to go home and will have schooling remotely between the hours of 1, and I'm forgetting what the end time is. So there will be instruction happening in the afternoon.
Oh, okay, thank you. I missed that. Okay, thanks. I am concerned about extended day, especially if it's ending at noon, whether they can pick up at noon, and then would they be responsible for both lunch, recess, and the remote learning part of the day, that hour or so. So something to think about. I actually like a hybrid of the hybrid. I think I'm with Helen. I would like to see BEEP, of course, but I also would like to see K to 2, but I'm actually a K to 3 person. I know early childhood ends at 2, but there's that old saying that says, you learn to read up into grade 3, and then grade 4 you read to learn. So grade 3 students really are still need a lot of support and a lot of help, and they're still learning the reading skills. So if you do a K to 2 and on site, I would even consider K to 3. That's just how I think of it. And I would really encourage us to think about doing that. I think the young children really need to be in school as best we can. Just for outdoor education, I'm a big believer in being outdoors as much as possible. I also believe in outdoor education so that you learn, not just bring your reading group outside to read, but you actually take advantage of the outdoors as a learning environment. And I know there were about 15 teachers that had a grant this summer, and they've done some exciting work together. They were kindergarten through middle school, so that might be a good group to talk to and see what they've learned. I think also that there's a group of about 50 teachers who did digital learning this summer, or took courses maybe at Columbia or someplace. And so I haven't heard what they've come back with, but I'm sure they learned a lot, and that was a great experience for them. And then lastly, I am just concerned with, in the survey, with the results there, that 16% of our families said they prefer remote, but 40% of our staff and teachers prefer remote. And that's a big difference. And so I'm just wondering, kind of going on this philosophical thing, how we help teachers be safe and feel safe and stay healthy in our schools. That if we kick them kicking and screaming because it doesn't feel safe to them, that's just not going to be a good way to get the work done. And so I'm wondering, they had I think they had 5 pages of questions about health and safety concerns and how we might address those and help our staff, our wonderful staff, feel safe and stay healthy, even if they do hybrid or if they come on site. So those are kind of my thoughts for right now. Okay. So, Jim, help me here with this. We said we'd go till 2. We went till 2:30. We've only had time for 1 round for everybody. I don't know if you feel like you've got enough that we end this and people send you more thoughts, over email, or do people want to keep going on this? I mean,
I would say, Suzanne, if you're okay, we have quite a bit in terms of questions and concerns and issues, quite a bit. If someone had, on a second thought, I wish I had said, then we'll certainly take that. But just to go through to ask questions now, unless it's really something that I really want to ask, we have a tremendous amount to follow up on, and it covers the gamut. And there's only a little bit of redundancy. Most of it is pretty darn good and pretty challenging, for us to get to. So if the group is okay, we certainly have enough to take us to go full bore on what we have. Even quite frankly, some of the stuff around instruction. If we do a 50-50 hybrid, is that half, essentially the curriculum cut in half? And what does that mean in terms of education? I think we have to look at that. I was really impressed, and I should have thought about it and hadn't, with the comments about having cameras. Live streaming can be really challenging, but maybe it doesn't have to be live streaming. I mean, I don't know whether you know TECA. TECA is a virtual high school. It's a public school, and it's a K-12 full virtual high school in Massachusetts, licensed by the Department of Education. And they have live instruction that is taught by teachers remotely, and in this format. But they also have pre-recorded lessons that they give to students. And when I think about the comment that was made about filming, it doesn't have to be live streaming, which cuts into a whole bunch of things. And maybe there are privacy issues. I don't know, but we should be able to. We should at least take a look at that, because in a sense that clones people, and so that was brilliant, and that in itself is worth having this conversation. I think, Suzanne, in my long-winded way, it's enough already. We have enough here. And we'll go right at it and come back. We want to get the school committee as much information as we can, because it's a really tough decision. It really is. And by the way, it's a tough recommendation. Make no mistake about that. So this team is so appreciative of your questions. They're thoughtful, they're insightful, they're pointed, and I think they're asking the right questions. So I would say, let us give a shot at this. And we'll try to get responses to you, obviously without delay, so that you can have another round of discussion based on a little bit of time goes by. Matt gets the facility stuff. So I think we're good. That's what I would say.
Okay, so can we just think through out loud how we're going to do this on August 6th, because we have the workshop. We're going
to have to postpone the workshop.
You're going to postpone the workshop.
I don't see how we can have the workshop. This takes precedent. And we may have to meet before the 6th, by the way.
So that was my question on process, Jim, just coming back to the question where I started, which was like, how are we going to do this? If you guys want to vote on August 6th, help us understand what needs to happen in terms of capital or finance or curriculum or the full school committee between now and then so that you can get a vote on the 6th.
Yeah, well, we gave ourselves a little bit of leeway there, Susan, because it has to go to the department by the 10th. And so we have a few more days after that. I'll have much more, I think, knowledge about timing now that this is great information, and we'll all be following up. But now there's much more of a sense of urgency from the state and from what we need to know. So I'll have more information about that in the next couple of days. And if bad comes to worse, we want to hit that August 10th deadline. But I'm here to tell you that superintendents, the more that I've spoken with, are more interested in trying to get this right than they are in hitting a deadline. So for the state, if it goes the 11th or the 12th, they're not going to lose any sleep over that. But if they rush it and get it wrong, they're going to lose a lot of sleep. So right now, I would say in terms of process, we're going to take this information and we're going to pass it out. Who's going to do what? We need to get some answers. We need to get some direction. Come back, gather again, put something together, bring it to you and let you know. And a lot of you are going to know what's going on in real time anyway because of the panels and all. But we'll come back to the committee in public so that the public knows about this and have another, I hope, robust discussion that begins to narrow so we see where we are. And my expectation is the more information we get and the more it narrows, the model that we're going to use to open schools is going to become self-evident. That's what I'm hoping. And of course, there are other things going on, as you're aware of, in terms of the unions are concerned about opening, and so there's information that'll be coming that way as well. And I don't know who said it. I think it may have been you, Susan, that we are facing something that in the history of education has never happened. And it is really, I think, stressful is not the right word. I just think that since we don't know, sort of the gravity of this, it feels like the gravity of the decisions that we have to make are really, really heavy. It's not like, gee, should we use this math program or that math program? That's not the question. It's not at all. This is the question: how do we keep people safe and provide our children with the education that they need in a time when families, the society, are worried about their own health? So this is big. This is really big. So we will do everything we can to answer these questions as specifically, as honestly, as directly as we can, and we'll come right back here and hope that you keep shining it down and asking the questions until you're satisfied that you can take a vote. You may not like all the information, and you may be making a vote that you wish you didn't have to make. I certainly am making a recommendation I wish I didn't have to make, but nevertheless, I am going to be making a recommendation. And if we do this together, and even as a community, so that the community can see that what we're struggling with is trying to get it right. Nobody's struggling with we have to make a decision and we're going to step up and we're going to do it. But what we're struggling with is making certain that we're not precipitous, we're not arrogant, we don't presume we know all the answers. We take everything into consideration. We share it openly, and we say we think this is the best thing for us to do in the short haul, knowing that the world changes, we can change, we're going to be nimble. Nothing is forever. We just want to do the right thing that we can do it now. I don't know if that makes sense, but that's where my head's at.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for that. Okay, so then we'll talk and we'll plan and we'll figure out what we need to do. Right. in terms of the meetings is what I'm saying, not in terms of what you're saying. Okay, then we'll move on if we can to
in terms of the meeting. Right now there's capital subcommittee on Wednesday, school committee's meeting on the 6th. Is there be a need for a meeting in between?
That's what I'm asking Jim.
We may want to think about that now.
Let us know if we can.
I think there may be. It depends on the information that we get and whether we think we need to have more discussion with the school committee. They very well, maybe. How comfortable will you be if we come on the 6th and say, okay, this is what we think we have, and now we're going to be presenting a recommendation. I wouldn't. I know that people are busy, and I really, honestly, I appreciate that. But I think we should have another meeting in between to vet this a little more.
It's too important. I do think, and I saw Susan, you want to?
No, I'm just going to say the same thing. And it's not only about us, it's about the fact that the community, we have lots of people watching right now, which is great, but the community also needs to absorb. I mean, we are asking people to absorb, just as you said, Jim, 2 massive things. One is just, life-threatening health information, absorbing and acting on that. And then, a massive curricular reform to have a seamless experience. And those are 2 really hard, and people don't perform well when they are stressed about, existential health and safety issues. And so teachers don't, students don't. So I would really urge that we have at least one. Now, nobody wants to be in more meetings, but just some more conversation about this, and especially a way to kind of get at least some of this out there.
So we'll have a meeting, maybe 2, then we'll skip one later on.
And I'd also like to just ask that we not take any action. I wasn't sure about the timeline for this, but just to ask that we not distribute any surveys to parents asking them to make choices until we have a better understanding of what the choices are that are on the table.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So Jim, I'll hear from you when you have something to present to us. I mean, I don't want to, unless you have a time you think you could pick now.
I think that, Suzanne, that if you will, I'll meet with the team and we'll set up a sort of a timeline. And then I probably will call you, I'll probably call you tomorrow, Suzanne.
Okay. That's good. That's good.
All right. I could even send a memo to the whole committee. That might be better. I'll send something to the whole committee.
We could do a doodle poll. Robin can do that, and just to find out the most number of people that can attend. If you have some dates for us.
Yeah, we'll try to do that.
Okay. Yeah. Okay, good. Thank you, everyone, for being flexible and understanding. But it really is critical that we get this as right as we can, for sure.
Yeah.
Okay, we're going to move on to financial updates, and Mary Ellen and Susan.
We balanced the 2020 budget. You'll have a report for your August workshop, and some of the details around what broke in our favor and how we're going through 21, how we're approaching 21. We did get recently, just in terms of the funding, to answer sort of some breaking or updated news about funding for PPE, we did get information from the state regarding the $225 per student that was being allocated, and how we access that for PPE. So Matt and I are working on that, submitting that application to get those funds. It's roughly about $1.7 million, and those funds will be used for purchasing PPE. We have to also look at those funds for funding any custodians that we return from furlough. We have custodians on furlough because rental facilities is not generating any revenue because we're not renting our facilities, and we charge 3 custodians to our facilities budget. So, but the one piece caveat to the 3 sources of funding coming from the state is that those funds must be obligated by 12/30/20. So they're not full year, school year, fiscal year funds. So the word obligated needs to be clarified in terms of whether we can actually spend those funds, contract and spend those funds for the full school year, or whether those funds actually have to be expended in full by 12/30. Those are 2 very different approaches to those funding plans. So more to come on that probably in August as we unfold or talk about how the 21 budget is faring. We've opened the 21 budget. I want to remind the committee that we reduced our expense budget by a total of $975,000, 500 from contracted services through OTL. We reduced 150,000 in student services and contracted services. We reduced 300,000 in other category. And I need to say out loud that that will impact any kind of travel funds, mostly travel funds, food. So the food and meals budgets for the that we have for providing for students, food for meetings, food for events. So presumably we're not meeting in person, so our need for snacks and things like that will be reduced. But those lines were cut to meet that 300,000. And I'm still in the process of reconciling all the staffing budgets and staffing lines and staffing levels. And the next 2 weeks, be working with principals and department heads around finalizing those and making sure we have funding for all the staffing FTEs that we've brought back.
People have questions, comments for Mary Ellen? Helen?
So these one-time monies, the 225 per student, could be used for HEPA portable filters and things like that, right? Possibly even for the cameras that we might need for remote learning. We could justify it as a way of PPE, I suppose. Couldn't it cover some of those things?
Yeah. So there, all of the funds actually whether it's the town's portion or the two pieces that have come to the school department could have all included, interestingly enough, all three have included technology support is eligible. Plus there's a separate technology grant that's also coming out. I think we're only getting like 45,000 from that, not that much. And food service, lunch and meals is also part of seems to be all part of the funds except for the technology grant. But this last one for the $1.7 million is really focused on the PPE and supporting the PPE costs.
So one of the things too, I mean, the three custodians that are paid for out of the revolving fund, it's there primarily because there's the cost of doing those work time. I assume you need them not for the regular day-to-day cleaning, but because there are events or because there's rentals. I'm not clear why we would use that one-time money for custodians who we're bringing back from furlough is what I'm trying to understand.
Oh, so we have custodians on furlough because we don't have rental of facilities income.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so we do need additional we need custodial support for additional cleaning under the new cleaning structures and protocols. So we would obviously want to bring back the employees that are most familiar with our buildings.
Oh, absolutely.
But we need a funding source for them. There's no funding in the general fund. So the reserve, there's no funding in the general fund to just bring those custodians back. We have to find them a funding source to pay them. And so those, the $1.7 million does allow for cleaning services specifically. And so we're looking into if we need to bring custodians back and need more custodians, is where would we charge them? Because the operating budget can't support additional custodians. So we need to find a funding source for them.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Mary Ellen, I had a question. If our students leave at noon, how will that, and they don't get lunch at school, how will that impact our lunch program and our budget?
So that's going to be a very interesting, curious conversation for school committee, because if we're not providing meals, or we're only providing meals for our free and reduced lunch students, You need to do another vote of a deficit spending for free and reduced lunch students. And you would need to we would need to have a discussion around furloughing or terminating and closing our school lunch program. Or reducing it to a skeleton crew because that's all we're providing. And so in the presentation Matt made for the summer, we've already reduced it one administrative office position to reduce the deficit to 8,000 rather than 28,000. The question would be during the fall, if we're not open, how many employees do we need? Who are we serving? And what's the revenue stream? And then what is the deficit the school committee needs to make? And what of our 3 pots of funds through the COVID stimulus funds that we have can pay for that deficit?
Okay, so it's too soon to make that decision now. It all depends on what we do this fall, but I just want to just to be thinking about, yeah. Okay, thank you.
And it may even be that we have a reduction in force in terms of our food service because we would need to do the planning around that differently. Families may choose to, if they're able, pack their own children's lunch rather than having any kind of communal meals or sharing of that. I don't know. We've got some work to do on that side once we know what the plan is for how school will open.
Okay, thank you. Seeing no other questions, we'll move on to the discussion on the Driscoll project schedule. Susan, are you up?
Yes, I'm happy to. So as we talked about in our last meeting, there were sort of a set of conversations at the Building Commission, at our capital subcommittee very briefly, and with us very briefly about whether or not we wanted to try to continue on the same path with the construction project, which would mean trying to get the bids out or get things out by August 1st, take the fields offline this fall, and then try to be in the building by January of 2023, as opposed to sort of taking the fall, leaving it open for the kids through March, and then adding time on the other side of the project. We had a meeting, we also had a school building committee meeting, a Driscoll School Building Committee meeting. There has been a tremendous amount of support for sort of extending the timeline, both in terms of hoped for but not guaranteed cost savings, but more specifically the idea of having the fields online. I think, as you all remember, the play fields during the project were one of the #1 questions of the community anyway, and essentially that very small teacher parking lot right next to the cafeteria is all that 650 some students would have had. So there were kind of 2 things. One is a petition, as some of you know, to open up Westbourne Terrace for certain hours during the day to play. Matt Gillis and the principal, David Euclid, have talked about that a little bit. There's obviously a lot of questions about neighbors and rolling balls and that sort of thing down the street. But that's an open question about whether that space can be opened. But regardless of that, there does seem to be a fair amount of public support for, and certainly not a lot of opposition to extending out the time frame. The other thing that I will, so the Building Commission weighed in. They thought that it was a good idea. They had thought that the timeline was too aggressive from the beginning. David Euclid sent out an email to all of the parents and got back very, very few responses. We got back very few responses from the website as well. Although it was a topic of conversation, I can say, not among everyone, but it was a topic of conversation among some of the groups of parent emails going around. The last thing I'll say is that there was an email which you all received a copy of from the educators, which was sort of talking about the construction project a little bit more holistically. And there are a number of questions there, which were very good questions that sort of different groups of people are addressing. So for instance, there's a set of questions around sort of the air quality. Some of those are almost the easier questions, if you will, because the air quality questions are ones where there are pretty rigorous protocols in place about how those work during a construction project. So I think that's a communication issue, but certainly the idea that we we're currently doing a construction project with students on site at the high school. Safety is important, but that's something that the architects and construction managers have a lot of experience with. There's a question about the assessment of the safety over the next year or two through COVID. And there's just an important set of conversations that we haven't had with teachers apropos of the first hour plus of this conversation, just about how the buildings how we're going to be using the buildings, how we're going to be using the outdoors during this time frame. And so there are very, very valid questions and concerns that need to get addressed by all of us, but specifically Jim and David and others and Matt about reopening the building. Sort of what is it going to take to make all of our buildings safe, especially given the age and decrepitude of the Driscoll School building HVAC system to begin with. There are obviously questions about reduced enrollment. I think that probably needs a more systemic response. But again, some of the teachers have said, well, aren't we now going to have lower enrollment, so we don't need a 4-section building? We should go back to the drawing board. Remembering that we don't have a night school and that we were already sort of pushing back the idea that we're going to need less space probably doesn't have a lot of legs, but at any rate, it's a good question. We need to address it. And then finally, I think there was some interest in educators about wanting to be part of the process. And obviously every building committee meeting is open, and it would be fantastic if teachers wanted to join us. They haven't chosen to, but that would be fantastic. So there are sort of responses for most of those questions. Again, with the obvious exception of the one that we're all grappling with, which is, teaching during a pandemic during decrepit buildings, with decrepit buildings. So I think that's sort of that's the main piece of it. The only other thing I'll say is that there has been an ongoing conversation between the architects and the building committee and the community about what does it mean? Are we really doing everything we can to be as safe and COVID-friendly, COVID-ready as possible with this building? I just want to let folks here know, because I don't expect you've come to all the building committee meetings, that this has been a topic of conversation for probably 3 or 4 months now. There have been assurances and descriptions of all the different things that that this building has in terms of displaced air, in terms of airflow, in terms of surfaces you can just, sort of splash bleach on, sinks in every classroom. There's sort of a whole set of things there. And so again, I think that's probably a communication issue. And obviously there are always new ideas, which would be great. But at any rate, there's sort of a lot of thoughts been given to that as well. So with all of that said, there are a lot of decisions we have to make about this fall overall. And there's obviously a lot of communication about a whole bunch of these pieces. But other than that, I'm not aware of a lot of feedback that's come in. Someone else might have gotten something else from the website or anything else, but or other parents. But I guess I would just sort of ask, if there's anyone who feels that it's absolutely critical to stick to the original timeline, and just sort of talk about that a little bit, because otherwise it does seem that the direction is sort of moving the other way. Students and the principal more space this fall.
Comments or questions?
Well, I just want to comment that I totally support moving the project forward 6 months. I think it makes sense in every single way possible. And the capital subcommittee, the sense of the capital subcommittee was to also encourage the project that I think we need to take a vote though here. So
Yeah, it would probably be a good, if anybody else has thoughts, I'd like to hear them. And we probably should take a vote to support that so that we can send that to the school building committee and to Tony and others, just to make sure that they're all clear on the will of the school committee.
Do we have a motion? I think the select board also needs to vote.
I'm sorry?
I think the select board also needs to vote.
Yeah.
Susan, do we have a motion, or do you?
I'm happy to move it. I just wanted to see if there aren't any questions. Can we keep going? Yeah, I'm happy to move.
Oh yeah,
I'm happy to move that we support the extension of the Driscoll School Building timeline such that all of the bids will be done as one package and sent out on March 1st rather than early bid packages beginning August 1st.
Do I have a second to that? Andy, great. So now I'll open it up to discussion, questions. Yeah. Jennifer?
Sorry, I wanted to unmute myself and I took myself off video. I just wanted to, in my understanding of this conversation and the email, some of the emails that we've been sent, I really like the idea of being able to use that open space during the current pandemic. So I think it's on those merits alone is a good idea. So that's my comment.
Seeing no other questions or comments, we'll go ahead and take the vote. That's okay. Okay, we'll go. David? Oh,
yes.
Thanks, David. I don't know if you're still there. Sharon?
I support.
Susan?
Yes.
Jennifer? Yes.
Helen?
Yes.
Mariah?
Yes.
Andy?
Yes.
Barbara?
Yes.
And I vote yes. It's unanimous. Thank you. Thank you for that.
Great. Thanks, everybody.
David, are you there, or did you have to go off for court? David?
Yes, I'm sorry. Just balancing work as well.
I know. I appreciate it. Do you want us to come back to you, or you want us to go ahead?
You can proceed now.
Okay, so we're going to talk about your proposed policies.
That's correct. So I did follow up on Helen's suggestion with respect to the public comment policy about whether there would be any issues in restricting speech in order to protect the privacy of certain students who might sometimes be embarrassed or otherwise concerned about what gets shared publicly. I do not yet have a response, so I'm not sure if other school committee members would want us to hold off on that until we get a response, or whether we would be prepared to move forward anyway. I'm amenable to either direction. As for the other policies, at our last meeting, when they came up, no one seemed to have any further questions, so I would like that we at least move on those two. And those two would be the homeless student policy as well as the foster care students policy.
Are you moving those two to acceptance?
I am, yes.
Do we have a second on the two, the first two? Mariah, thank you. Discussion about that? Any questions, comments? Okay, seeing none, we'll take a vote. That's okay. David?
Yes.
Sharon?
Yes.
Susan?
Yes.
Jennifer?
Yes.
Helen?
Yes.
Mariah?
Yes.
Andy?
Yes.
Barbara?
Yes.
And I vote yes as well. It's unanimous. So now you're down to the public comment.
Correct. So if it's the will of the committee that we wait for an answer from town council, then I'm certainly willing to do that. If others would like to move it now, then I'm comfortable with that as well. For me personally, even if town council comes back and says that it would be okay to restrict speech to protect the student, I would still rather err on the side of free speech just from a policy perspective. And I would hope that the parent or any individual who is going to disclose something of a private nature would exercise her or his discretion appropriately, especially if it's involving a child or a student. Also, the policy does allow for the chair of the committee to step in and essentially tell someone that they might be veering into an area that's not appropriate. So I feel that that's another way in which we are protected under the policy as currently constituted. But I am open to gathering more information.
Mariah, did you have your hand up?
Yeah, I was hoping we could defer this one a little bit more. I had wanted to make some additional comments and I just ran out of time to get them back to David. So since we're also waiting for something else, then maybe we could do that.
That's fine with me.
Okay. Anybody else feel strongly that we shouldn't do that? Okay, then if that's okay, David, we'll just defer that one. And then Mariah, if you could get your comments to him, that would be helpful. Thank you very much. Okay, we're moving along. We've gained some time. It's good. So on the subcommittees and the liaison assignments, I don't know if you've had a chance to look at them. We have a couple still up for grabs, I think. So if you feel like you've been shortchanged and you want more work, we can find some things for you. Is there any big mistakes that we've made, or that certainly you can talk to me offline if you want. I don't think we have to vote on these, do we?
We do not.
Thank you, no. Okay, so these are assignments, and if you need to make some adjustments or changes, just talk to me. We'll see what we can do. And then you got a list of school committee meeting dates. I think, Helen, you had one that wasn't working. I think it was
Sorry, Suzanne. Sorry, just to backtrack. As I recall, the last year when this announcement was made, the actual appointments to the subcommittees and the liaisons was read out loud, so it could be read into the public record so that the public could hear it. I don't know that we have to, but I don't know if that's something you want to do.
So did they read out all the members for all the committees and all the liaisons?
I don't think we did that for liaisons. That would take a very long time. But for committees, I do recall, I think that we may have read that out orally.
Okay.
For committees, but not liaisons. Yeah.
Okay. I'm happy to do that. Just give me a minute here and we'll make that happen. Capital Improvement Subcommittee, Helen Chalupsky is chair, with committee members Andy, Mariah, and Barbara. Building Project liaisons, BHS Expansion, Susan. Wolf Dickoff is, I think, the co-chair, and Driscoll is also Susan. And then Pierce School is Helen Chalupsky and Suzanne, myself. Curriculum Subcommittee, Jennifer Monopoly is the chair, with members Helen, Susan, and Barbara. Finance Subcommittee, Susan Wolf Dickoff is chair, with Sharon, Mariah, and David. Government Relations Subcommittee, Helen Chalupsky is chair, with Andy and Mariah as subcommittee members. A Negotiations Subcommittee, right now it's myself, Suzanne, as chair, with Sharon and Andy as members. Policy Review Subcommittee is David Perlman, chair, with Sharon, Andy, and Jennifer. And if we need it this year, Superintendent Search Preliminary Screening Committee is Helen Chalupsky as chair, with Suzanne, Jennifer, and David as members. So again, if it's not going to work for you, let me know and we'll see what we can do. I tried to get what you wanted. Mariah.
Just a question. So on the liaisons, does that get posted anywhere on the website? Like, how does anyone besides us know who liaisons are?
It is posted.
Robin's going to help us with that. Robin?
Yes, it does get posted on the website, and the list, once it's finalized, will get widely distributed to town school leaders and various groups.
Gotcha. Thank you.
There's something I would like to add. So traditionally, the Government Relations Subcommittee has been a committee of one. That was Helen. And Suzanne and I discussed that further, and we think that whether it's an issue of funding or about special education, or a lot of issues we're now dealing with are beyond Brookline alone. and involve advocacy at the state level. So we felt that it's important that we make this committee a little more robust. That doesn't necessarily mean it's going to meet as often as the core 4 groups or that it's suddenly going to have a ton of work, but we did think it would be appropriate to add some other members and perhaps have meetings a little more regularly because of that importance of state level advocacy.
Thanks, David. That is what we said. And thank you to Helen, who's always been doing this all by herself. So we thought we'd give you some
Well,
help.
it's always a committee of the whole, too. Everybody's always invited to those meetings. And the most important piece about it is speaking with our legislators in January and trying to get a handle on what the state budget will look like, which obviously wasn't so great this year. Anyway. And the good news, actually, as long as we're talking about government relations, I saw the state only was 10% in revenues for this year, for last fiscal year. So that's at least a start. People thought it would be worse.
Thank you, Helen, for your work on that. I appreciate it. And so looking at our school committee meeting dates, I think, Helen, you mentioned one in February that you let Robin know about that we need to redo or something.
Right. It's a Thursday meet, the first night of Purim.
Yeah.
I noticed it as a Jewish holiday that night. It's supposed to change. I think that would be good.
Yeah, that's February 4th, is it? Is that the one?
I can tell you in a minute.
I think it's February 25th, and we had talked about changing it possibly to Tuesday, February 23rd, if that works for folks.
Okay. Anybody else see any conflicts or concerns? Okay. If you do, let me know or let Robin know. We'll figure that out. Do we have any new business today? No? Okay. Jim, do we need to go into executive session?
I think we should go into executive session and be very brief, but for purposes of negotiations.
Okay. Jennifer?
Thank you. I'm sorry, can we just clarify briefly before we move on about the meetings coming up? So we are talking about rescheduling the workshop, clearly because we have a lot of things that are urgently needed to be addressed. When I am extremely interested in our workshop and goal setting and the conversation about school committee goals, and I'd like to introduce the conversation about subcommittee goals and lots of things that might be considered new business, but when might we put that off to? I'm just very eager that it happen before we get too far into our work together. And so do we have any thoughts on when that might be?
It's possible we could do the August 20th. That could be our workshop meeting. Maybe things will, at least decisions will have been made. If not, we may have to book another meeting because I think we should do it before September 1st. So we start the fall.
I would like to see that. And I think it makes a lot of sense for us to figure out what we think the fall is going to look like to the best of our abilities at that time. And so, because I think some of our goals could be based off of, what we think lies ahead of us. And so it doesn't really make some sense to do it before then. And so therefore it makes a lot of sense to do it after we have sort of some of this laid out, but before the beginning of our school year. I think I would just encourage us to try to aim for that.
Yeah. Well, I would hope we could do the 20th. And if we can't do the 20th, then I think we need to schedule another meeting if that doesn't seem to work. But Jim, can we talk about that and work it out?
Sure, absolutely.
Okay, then.
Can I ask one other question along those lines? If we are, I've gotten a lot of questions from folks from finance with respect to finance about not only where the 2020 budget landed, but also where we are with at least the first 3 months of the 2021 budget. And I know we were planning to do that next week at the workshop. So I just want to send up a flare that we'll probably have to have a finance committee meeting sooner rather than later. If nothing else, then just for the budget for the first quarter of this fiscal year. So I can work through Robin, but that's going to have to happen well before the 20th.
Okay, great. Other new business thoughts, concerns? Okay, then I'm going to propose a motion to meet an executive session pursuant to Massachusetts General Laws, Chapter 30A, Section 21A for the following purposes. Purpose 3, to discuss strategy with respects to collective bargaining with the Brookline Educators Union, BEU, Unit A, Unit B, and paraprofessionals. If an open meeting may have a detrimental effect on the bargaining or litigating position of the public body and the chair so declares. Do I have a second to the motion? David, thank you. We'll vote on that. Oh, and we will not be coming back to open session when it is done. So David?
Yes.
Sharon?
Yes.
Susan?
Yes.
Jennifer?
Yes.
Helen?
Yes.
Mariah?
Yes.
Andy?
Yes.
Barbara?
Yes.
And I say yes as well. It's unanimous. Okay, so we get to just stay here, right, Robin?
Yes, you can stay on this meeting. Yep.
And congratulations for ending the meeting. And congratulations to all of us.
Well, we haven't ended the meeting yet.
No, the schedule, we are actually on time. Actually, we're 6 minutes early.
Thank you, everyone.
Well, I'm in the middle of writing a small, I'll say it's a novella email with the rest of my comments that I didn't make during our